Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof Media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I am your host, constant reader Scott Daly, and I'm joined, as always, by the star quarterback of the Denholm Lions. It's Matt Freeman. Matt La.
Abala? Or what are we? Let's run it down their throats, boys.
So I know you've never been to a football game in your life.
I've been to at least 3 football games in my life.
It's a very specific number.
At least.
This week on the show, our series examining Stephen King's 11/22/63 continues with part 5, covering chapters 12 and 13. After a mere 300 pages, Jake finally makes his way down to Dallas, Texas, and then immediately leaves it again, heading instead to the small town of Jodie, where he sets up shop as an English teacher, a molder of minds, and the best director of Death of a Salesman we've ever seen. Wait. Yes, but also that's not the play I was referring to. Yes, he's going to direct Death of a Salesman, but
yes,
he also directed Of Mice and Men in this week's reading.
What's funny is I absolutely didn't catch your mistake there, which just tells me we're in for a real treat this episode. But yeah, no, it's funny. So much stuff happens this week. We were talking earlier about how many different parts of the story there are this week. It's really different. We're gonna have to keep quite a clip to make it through all this different stuff.
I agree. I mean, we start this week's reading in 1959, and we end in the fall of 61. And he's in Florida, Louisiana, Dallas, Jodie. All kinds of things are happening.
Yep.
So with that in mind, we better get into it, Matt. Just wanted to once again remind you folks about Kingslingers Live, which is a mere 5 weeks away now. Wait, hold on. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yep, that's a true statement I just made there. 5 weeks.
Nice.
5 weeks away. So there are still 22 tickets left to the live show. So if you are going to be in the area on the 14th and 15th, specifically the 15th is that Saturday event, there are still some tickets available. So we hope to see you there. It's going to be awesome. We had our like penultimate meeting last week. I think we've got one more meeting, and I think Matt and I are meeting with Robin to kind of talk about the show part of it a little bit here pretty soon. It's all coming together. It's wild. It's I'm nervous. I'm excited, and oh boy, 5 weeks.
Yep, it's real. It's exciting. We are looking forward to it.
Yeah. So head to doofmedia.com/Kingslingers Live, all one word, no spaces, and that will give you all the information and send you to the Ticket Spice website, where you can buy one of the final remaining 22 tickets. T-shirts are sold out now. In that we had a cutoff on T-shirts because we need to get them all ordered in and then ship them all to Bangor. So we had to call a cutoff on T-shirts, and that deadline has passed. So if you haven't gotten a T-shirt yet, sorry. We won't have those. We're gonna have goodies for sale at the live show, but not the T-shirts, because we had to order those in advance and get them shipped, and it was a whole big thing.
Yep. So you gotta find a doorway that goes back into the past if you want one of those T-shirts, unfortunately.
Yeah, no way the past is going to let you do that. This is as important of a thing as the JFK assassination. So yeah, it's not going to happen. Sorry.
If not more so. Yep.
All right, folks. Let's get into it. Let's begin this week with chapter 12. This chapter begins once again with Jake waxing philosophically about the joys of life in 1958 as he drives down to South Florida. I like this part specifically, Matt. It says, "I saw men building barns. I saw people helping people. 2 of them in a pickup truck stopped to help me when the Sunliner's radiator popped its top and I was broken down by the side of the road. That was in Virginia around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and one of them asked me if I needed a place to sleep. I guess I can imagine that happening in 2011, but it's a stretch." So this is a thing we do, Matt, where we always look back to the past and be like, man, everyone in the past was so much nicer than everyone in the present. Except it's one of those things that people have been doing for like 200 years. Like it's the same thing where like you're sitting there thinking comfortably as like, man, my generation's music was the best music. and every generation after mine has terrible music, and every single generation has made this same comment. So I feel like we just have this perception that like people were nicer in the past, and people in the present are like assholes that don't help anyone do anything ever. And I just don't feel like that's true. And if it is, it's very anecdotal. Like is there any like actual empirical evidence about this kind of thing?
I doubt. I mean, isn't the story of the Good Samaritan like literally like there was this one guy who was just so over the top nice by like, and then like what he did was sort of just like a humane thing to do that you would hope that any of us would do. It's just
he saw funny. A guy that was beaten up lying by the side of the road and was like, "Oh, I'm going to help him."
Yeah, right. I'm not going to step over him and go on with my journey. Yeah, right. I mean, there's also, it might also be kind of cyclical, or I think maybe more accurately, like depends on the culture of the place that you're in, which is sort of a cyclical, unpredictable thing. And he's in a sort of a very high trust period of time, but also there's a lot that's wrong with this period of time. Like that's like pretty much immediately after this, we talk about some of the stuff that's not so great.
Yeah, I mean that's very true. Like, and to Jake's credit, like, I think we've been like giving Jake a hard time about his rose-colored sunglasses about the past, but I do like how King has him point this out as well. That while he's traveling, he sees a sign for a quote unquote colored restroom that it turns out was basically nothing more than a plank like put over a stream where people could squat down. And the text says, "If I ever gave you the idea that 1958 was all Andy and Opie, remember that path, okay? The one lined with poison ivy and the board over the stream." So like it is absolutely true that the book is consciously trying to paint a picture that is not just wasn't 1958 and the 50s in general and the 60s. Wasn't it just the fucking best, man? We're not doing that. But I guess the question I have for you then is what ultimately is the purpose of this in the narrative of the book? Like, why are we doing this? Why are we having these? Because it's actually interesting. Like, you would think if we continue to hit this beat of Jake's kind of blindness to the problems of the era as he's just like taking in the joys or the good parts or the perceived good parts of it, then you could be like, oh, well, King's making a point here, right? Is that like the way nostalgia can be dangerous, and the way it can close your mind to the actual real problems of people. But then he does this where he has Jake notice and is disturbed by this colored restroom. That's kind of a shock back to reality for him of like, oh, well, people are being nice to me because I'm a white man. If I was black, this would not be my I would be much more likely to get helped in 2011 on the side of the road than in 1958. So I don't know, man. So I'm talking a lot, but like, what are you doing here? In your opinion?
I'm not really sure. I guess I have a couple thoughts, but I'm not too sure of either of them. So I guess the first is just like you mentioned, this is a recurring beat that we see that the past is both better and worse at the same time. It's kind of a paradox, but it's simply just like over time, between the 50s and the 2010s, a lot of things got better and maybe some things got worse. Maybe we all trust each other a little bit less than we used to. Maybe that is true. Like maybe our food is of lower quality than it used to be in some specific sense. But also a lot of other stuff has gotten better, right? So like maybe there have been some trade-offs, right? That everything is, despite the fact that everything seems more expensive in the present, it's actually cheaper because of inflation, right? So like it's just a thing we hit over and over where it's not just like things have gotten better or things have gotten worse. It's like, well, things have kind of gotten better and worse at the same time. Yeah, I don't know what we're doing with that, but that's one thing that I think we hit over and over.
Yeah, I mean, that's the ultimate question is like, I agree with you essentially, and I agree that's one of the themes King is exploring here. I think the disconnect at this point in the story is, okay, but how is this tying into Jake's overall journey through the novel?
Right. Well, and we don't
know that yet.
We don't. I mean, the second thought I had, which I think it maybe is too early to talk to say one or the other, but it's like, there's this feeling of like, you save JFK and maybe it's like you save the future and you stop all these bad things from happening. And like and there's an implicit thought in there somewhere. Not that Jake has ever articulated this, but there's a thought that's like, you save JFK, and then you go back to 2011, and it's like that picture that people, it's that meme where it's like the future if blank had happened, and it's like the Star Trek future. And it's like, I think the book is sort of hinting that that's not really true. Like, even if you save JFK and you maybe even stop Vietnam, like, oh wow, wouldn't that be great? And it's like, well, yes, but also some other bad stuff will happen that you can't possibly predict as a consequence of this. And it's not straightforward, and the twists and turns of Ka just are not predictable.
Yeah, no, I like that as this kind of laying the seeds of this idea that good and bad exist in the past, in the future, in the present, and the idea that fixing one thing will create utopia is absurd. Yeah. I like that.
Cool.
Complete non sequitur here, but I just wanted to point something out, which is that my wife is listening to this podcast for the very first time, because she's really never read Stephen King books before. She read The Green Mile, but we hadn't done an episode on that. So she's reading 11/22/63 and listening to the podcast. Hi, babe. I know you're listening to this right now. But she said to me the other week, Matt, she said, "Why are you pretending not to know what happens in the book? You've read the book. Scott, you've read the book." And I was just like, that's the show. I can't tell him. I can't tell him I know what's going to happen.
Yeah, you just the joy of the show is either laughing at me or very rarely like being impressed by some leap that I make. But that's the whole conceit of the show.
Yeah. So the reason I'm saying that is this what are we doing with this question I'm asking you is another example of me pretending like I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, like even if you know what's going to happen plot wise, like it can still be valid to just have a thematic conversation of just like, what role does this play in the themes of the story, notwithstanding like what actually happens plot wise.
For sure.
Yeah.
So eventually Jake gets to the Gulf Coast, where he decides to stop and stay for a while, which is interesting. Like, he doesn't have a reason to be in Florida, right? It's not like, oh, Lee Harvey Oswald is going to walk through this area of the country and I need to be here to see him and make sure of that. He's just like, I don't know, it'd be fun to drive to Florida and hang out in Florida for a while. And it just seems like he's touring the US. And I think there's even a place like in the reading where he's like, oh, it's just really great, like getting to enjoy America, right? And it's like, hey, Jake, you could do that in 2011 too. You could just hop in your car and drive to Florida. Like, especially you're a teacher, like you have the summers off. You could just do that.
That is funny. Yes. Americans are spoiled rotten because we have this huge country with this amazing variety of biomes and geography and spectacular natural beauty. But instead of driving a few hours to see that stuff, we want to go to Europe for some reason.
Hey, I like Europe.
Europe's cool for history, but America has the best natural beauty of, I'm not going to say the whole world, but it has an amazing variety of natural beauty.
Yeah. Florida.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing to keep in mind is that based on Stephen King's understanding of geography that he's demonstrated across all the books we've read, it's possible that he just thinks that Florida is between Maine and Texas.
That is true. I mean, lest we all forget The Stand and our New York City police officer journeying from Orlando, Florida to Oklahoma to New York City.
I am wondering if like we've all been just not thinking about this, right? In much the same way that like Midworld has like a weird north, south, east, west thing going on, that maybe anytime you're on Earth in a Stephen King story and he's referring to America, it's actually just shaped completely differently. This is my new headcanon, is that in his America, Florida is not actually a peninsula. It's just a big state in the middle of the country that you have to drive through to get anywhere.
I think that's a perfect excuse for Stephen King not bothering to open a map while writing a book.
There you go.
So sure, yeah.
Excellent.
It's just like in Drawing of the Three when Roland looks to the sunset in the east and Well, walking north along the beach is the water is to his right. How did that happen? He just forgot.
He was in Florida.
He just forgot. And then conveniently, he's just like, well, yeah, no, it's the whole thing. There's this crazy shit going on here.
Yeah, he contorted the geometry of an entire world to cover for his mistake. I love it.
Oh, did you pick the wrong borough for Co-op City? Aha, I did that on purpose, you see, because Eddie's world is slightly different.
Oh, man.
You can't lose. It's great.
Cannot lose.
One small comment about Florida, Matt, just because it's kind of on the brain for us right now. Jake gets fairly close, but not right to where the fictional Doomakey is located. And part of me wonders whether that was intentional or not. I mean, it's almost certainly true that King picked this area because, like, this is where he lives. He lives in this part of Florida. He has a house there and frequents it often. And so I'm going to take my character to Florida, and he's going to be in this part of Florida because I know this part of Florida. But I don't know, just considering we just finished reading Doomakey, like, I can't help think about that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I agree with you that Florida is on his mind during this period of his life. So yeah, let's just say it's an intentional Doomakey connection because why not?
Sure. Everyone that leaves Maine has to go through Florida. Through either through your stated reason or just because that's what he does. So, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like metaphysically Florida is sort of the opposite of Maine. So
that's fair.
So it just makes sense to me, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I like that. So Jake leaves behind his real estate persona and becomes George Amberson, writer. He's working on 2 stories, Matt. Number 1 is, of course, the book that we're currently reading. I will once again say I am embarrassed by our very early definitive statement on that this book does not follow the normal pattern of being a story relayed. Obviously not true at all. He's directly referencing us, the reader, several times in this week's reading. But his second book, Matt, is a book that he kind of just invents. So he has a cover story. So it's a book called The Murder Place. It's about Derry. And it's just so he can have something to share with people if they see what he's working on. And it's all part of this cover story. But it's an interesting book, Matt, because it takes place in a fictionalized version of Derry. We learn a little bit later this week that it contains a person dressing up as a clown murdering children. What's your reaction to The Murder Place, Matt?
Yeah, well, it's funny because my initial reaction when it was first mentioned was like, it's kind of funny that the novel he's writing has obvious similarities to it. And I felt slightly, clever for thinking of this, and then the book goes on to make it super obvious that this is a I don't know, I guess just a reference to it, but perhaps a bit more than a reference because, like, he did get the willies from looking into that tunnel in the ironworks. So maybe he's got some shine here that's cluing him into what's really happening. I don't know. It's really fundamentally just a wink at the audience. It's the clown, right? I was thinking, like, is there something more to it than just a wink at the audience? But I think it's mostly just a wink at the audience, and that's fine.
Sure. Yeah, and I think we don't like what. There's been a joke throughout every King novel of that these characters, especially these writer characters, are just Stephen King inserts. Like, that has been a thing in every Stephen King book. But this is one of those ones that I'm like, it's hard to argue against that sometimes. Like, dude, 6'4", teacher and a writer, heads down to Florida, right where Stephen King lives, writing a book about a place called Derry with a killer clown in it. Like, it seems like King is heavily leaning into the idea that this is a version of himself, which is an interesting. I think we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but just it forces you to kind of think about this character and maybe what the book is doing metatextually for King himself a little bit differently, I think.
Yeah, I think that's true. I agree with you that there are more details in this book that ask you to consider, like, what is this what is this book doing as a sort of soul searching tool, or what is he saying about his own life? Maybe. I mean, the main thing that's different, right, is like he was born much later than Stephen King, such that while the 50s are Stephen King's childhood, George Amberson. See, it's funny. I keep in my brain, I'm calling him George Amberson now. Jake.
Interesting. That's interesting, right?
I know. Right? Jake Epping was not born until much later, so that's different. Sorry, just like tangentially, like the height thing is always funny to me because King will frequently have his characters be like 6'4" or like 6'3", 6'4".
Yeah.
But then that never like matters in the story. And I'm like, this is truly written from the perspective of a super tall person who doesn't appreciate the fact that like everyone is always aware of the fact that you're a super tall person. When I'm not saying this as a super tall person. I'm saying this as like anytime you're around someone who's 6'4", you're just constantly aware that they're 6'4".
Yeah. And that's especially true if you're like kind of tall, but not that tall. Like I'm 6'2". And so I'm very used to in the average room being the tallest person in the room. And I am incredibly conscious of when there are people taller than me in the room, because it's just like I'm not used to having to look up to people. And it's weird for sure.
I agree. I'm not as tall as you, but I'm still not used to having to look up at people. So when somebody's 6'4", you're like, you're big. But it's just funny to me because it never comes up in the stories. And part of me is like, well, then why does he always make his characters so tall? And part of me is just like, I think it's just because he is that tall and he wants to, and like he relates to them better, or like feels more at home in their skin when he makes that choice.
Yeah, definitely. Jumping up ahead a little here, but it comes into play in this novel, at least, that Sadie is incredibly tall herself, and so like that singles her out as different from everyone around her, and allows them to have some level of bonding. It's like, well, you are used to being the tallest woman in the room. We meet you as kind of a person who is very aware of her height and very self-conscious of it, and here's this guy who is creepily taller than you. Especially like people are getting generally taller over time, so I think 6'4" would be even more anomalous back in 1960.
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that was one thought I had, is like, it's not like you never see somebody that tall nowadays, but maybe back in the 50s it would have been just unheard of. Like, oh my god, are you a professional basketball player just for being that? I don't actually know. I mean, I know like people more of our grandparents' generation were sort of even shorter, generally speaking. But that's I think of that as being like a full generation before this, although it's not quite true. I mean, I don't know. I'm confusing myself.
King 47, right? He was born in 47, so firmly in the baby boomer generation, and 6'4". So yeah, it's not like it didn't happen, right? But certainly a changing thing. Where humanity is growing taller in general over time, which has primarily to do with like the fact that we eat better. Well, okay, better is a relative term, right? But in the development stages of life, we have a more regular, nutritious diet.
Right. Exactly.
Okay, so one other thing Jake does in Florida is he gambles. He gambles some more. So he does some small bets, but he also does a really big bet, Matt. He bets on the Kentucky Derby. He gets 5-1 odds on a $2,000 bet and wins, of course, winning $12,000. Now, to be clear here, $12,000 in 1959, 1960 is $125,000 in 2024. That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And he placed the bet with a former mobster. And Jake, come on, man. You're being so stupid. Like, at least drive like out to Vegas or something where sports books are technically legal at the time. And like, at least you don't, and probably run by mobsters in Vegas as well. But like, at least it has to have some level of legality to it. So you have something to stand on. except not here making like under the table bets with a gangster in Florida. It's just like, come on, man. Like, just stop making bets that big. Like, just make smaller bets.
Yeah, right. It continues to amuse me just at a meta level in this book that this kind of munchkin min-maxing behavior really is the stock and trade of many time travel stories. But this book continually emphasizes that people would quickly notice this kind of behavior and also be pretty pissed about it if you did it to them. I mean, like, just in general, most, although not all, ways of getting rich quickly involve making somebody else into a sucker.
Yeah.
Like, anytime you win a big bet like this, you're making a bunch of people lose a bunch of money.
Yeah.
And people don't like to be suckers. Yeah.
Gambling does not create money, right? It just moves money from one person to another.
Right.
So,
I mean, even the stock market doesn't create money. It just moves money from a whole, basically, if he were to make some really surgical stock trades, he would just be stealing a small amount from lots of people.
Yeah.
Which is also still not great. I mean, it's interesting to think about, like, not just thinking about the past as this, like, game that you're playing, this almost like VR simulation that has no consequences. But if you actually think, like, if you actually have to live there, which he basically does, then these choices matter in a more moral sense, I guess.
Yeah. And he just doesn't. I mean, we'll get to the point where he maybe finally starts to realize that he's behaving ridiculously here. But I do like that, like, Back to the Future 2 just yada yada's over this idea, right? It's like, well, he got the sports almanac, and so he could win all the bets. So he just did that and everything, and he got super rich because of that. And it's like, well, how did that work actually? Like, bets with who, and how did they feel about that? And it's a fun little element of the story. And we have basically been primed, especially in this week's reading, to know that this is going to go really poorly for him eventually.
Yeah. Well, okay. It's just one little extra tangent for 1 second. I've always thought it was funny that people use sports betting as a time travel money making trick at all, because it's got to be the most susceptible to butterfly effect of any imaginable thing. Like, the baseball player, gets out of the pitcher gets out of bed on the wrong side of the bed because he stayed longer at a stoplight because the time traveler was crossing the street, whatever. and now, like, that whole game is different. It could go, not only is like every pitch now up for grabs, but the whole game is now up for grabs, because baseball is a very, like, statistical sport where tiny differences in a pitch can be the difference between a ball and a strike and a home run. So I'm just like, as soon as you start changing things, your sports almanac is worthless, but it's fine. I'm not complaining. I just think it's funny.
No, it is rather funny. Yeah. I mean, and maybe we'll see that in this book, like, maybe we'll see, like, he makes a big bet and he's inadvertently changed something. We've had, like, time and been described as this house of cards that he has to kind of stay away from, and maybe he gets a little too close to a certain house. Not saying definitively that's going to happen or not, but it's a fun thing to think about for sure, because I do think this book is focusing on the ways in which we change the past, for sure.
Right. I mean, it would be really interesting if he'd made some more significant change and then suddenly started losing all of his bets. That would be interesting.
Yeah. So while down in Florida, Jake finds a completely legit university based in Oklahoma offering diplomas for a small fee and a 50-question test. Questions that include, Matt, what was Moby's last name? Totally legit. Great. Perfect.
I love it. Yeah.
No one will see through this at all. So with Jake passes the test, gets his diploma, and is allowed to, or his degree, and is allowed to become a substitute teacher in Sarasota, Florida. And he's like the cool teacher, right? Like, they're reading Catcher in the Rye, and, like, all the kids think he's the coolest teacher. He, like, the one kid says, "I dig you the most." And this has led me to conclude, and I think this is probably just true, that if you ever, in your time in the public education system, have, like, a really cool teacher that just seemed like to kind of buck the system a little bit, they were probably a time traveler from the future.
So. Yeah. I think I've encountered a few of those.
Yeah. So here's the thing. You just go, You just like, you're talking to him and then you go, oh yeah, yeah. And what year is it? And just see, how quickly they answer.
Yeah. Yeah. They
Oh,
have to do some calculations.
2063?
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Or, yeah. I mean, you hope they start with 20, right? Yeah.
Oh God.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment here. Like, it's fun how the audiobook reader really pays attention to accents. And I'm not from Maine, so if he's doing a Maine accent, I'm like, yeah, that sounds like a Maine accent to me. And when he's doing the Florida accent, like I'm more familiar with like Southern accents broadly, and I'm like, yeah, that's sounds like a Florida accent. But what really impressed me is that when we do get to Texas eventually, and we start doing like the Jodie rural Texas accent, I was just like, that's really good. That's like a really good rural Texas accent, and I know what I'm talking about here. So I just think it was cool how he's actually that precise about his accents. That's I think an unusual skill that I was impressed by.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. I was, while you were talking, desperately trying to look up this guy's name because we talked about him before, but Craig Wasson, who is an actor as well. This is the thing. Yeah, when we mentioned him last time, people in our Reddit were like, he's a pretty well known actor that you've probably seen in films before.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't recognize his voice like from other things, but I believe you that that's possible.
Yeah, he was in De Palma's Body Double, which is, I don't know, a movie. If you, I love De Palma, so I've seen all his films, so I know him most from that. But he's been in quite a few things over the years.
Cool. I looked up his face. I don't think I recognize him, but that's okay.
Mm-hmm. So despite acting a little bit like an idiot, Jake is a man who believes in trusting his hunches. And after working as a sub for about a school year, he really starts to feel like this mobster he took $120,000 from is mad at him for some reason. And it is posing a real and present threat. And so he decides he needs to leave town. This is a hunch that by the way, proves absolutely correct. Good for you, Jake, I guess. Like, yeah, imagine if your superpower is like a danger sense, but only after you've gotten yourself into the danger.
Yeah, I mean, I'm torn between like, oh, does he have a little bit of the shine? Is he is he detecting this danger supernaturally? And like, are you this dumb that you don't you didn't just realize that you were in danger before you, like, you shouldn't need a hunch. This isn't a hunch situation. This is I just conned a mobster. Yeah. I should prepare myself for the consequences type situation.
Like just to set this in like perspective, because I think it's easy to like see this from Jake's perspective and just be like, oh, he just bet on a thing and won. Like, how could he have cheated? Like, no one would accuse him of cheating for that. But like, imagine a guy that's clearly not around here just shows up one day and just drops $2,000 on a bet and wins. And he's like some substitute teacher, like just hanging out randomly, like he's not from here. And then he like comes back more times and makes more bets. And it's like he tries, Jake is like convinced, like he's trying to be careful, right? Like, we'll give him credit for that. Like, he's intentionally losing bets to make himself seem like a sucker. But it's the type of thing where you're like, oh, this guy's smart, man. He sees right through this shit. There's like no way he's not seeing right through your brilliant attempts to paint yourself as this sucker.
Yeah,
it's funny. It's funny. I really like it.
Right. I mean, and the other thing is, and I guess I should stress that I don't really know what I'm talking about, but my understanding is that, like, one of the main reasons the mob gets into, bookieing and betting and stuff is because they have fixes in place for sporting events. And so they're playing both sides of the table, and they intend to make money off of people because they have the fix. They fix the fight, they fix the game or whatever. So when you come and take their money, they're not just like, well, I'm just a broker here. I just make the bets. It's like, no, you're breaking their scam. and they don't like that. So
yeah, it's definitely that. And I think also just like they have the muscle to enforce the collections of stuff on
sure.
like, like someone loses a bet, you need to collect your money from them. And they have the ability to do that.
Yep.
Extra judiciously. So yeah.
Yep.
No, I think you're right though. I mean, this is a dangerous game you're playing here, either way. So, and it kind of, Jake realizes that as he heads out of town. Of course, we jumping ahead a little bit here, we get to the phone call he places with the librarian that he learns that his house has been burned down like the night he left. So he was like literally right on time. So, I mean, I guess pat him on the back for that, for recognizing the hunch being immediate.
Yeah. Good job. Cutting a little close there, George. So I want to talk about the name George Amberson for a second.
Okay.
So I just keep calling him George in my head now. And I think that's really weird, first of all, and interesting. But I think like George Amberson is such a like more memorable and more sort of rolls off the tongue name than Jake Epping. Like if you just say the names like George Amberson, it's this very vowel-y name, whereas Jake Epping, it has these hard consonants. They're totally different. They feel totally different. And then I, just a little analysis for a second, like Amberson, amber is kind of the central part there. And amber is, fossilized tree sap. It's something that used to be fluid, and time has made it hard. I think that's interesting. Amber is also yellow, which we associate with the yellow card man, first and foremost, and warning. We talked about that before.
Yeah.
I wanted to have this conversation because we kind of did talk about Epping before, and it was like, well, that literally just means upping, actually, just up. And I don't remember if we said this on the show or not, but just like, well, there's the stairs and you go up and down the stairs, but that's like that felt a little thin to me, I think. But
sure.
I think I felt like it was worthwhile to dig into the differences between these two names because they really, like, they sound very different. And if you dig into them a little bit, I think there's maybe some meaning there to be gleaned.
Yeah, no, I like that. I mean, I generally just like the idea that you're connecting more to the name of the persona that he's kind of slowly becoming. Like that is, I think, symptomatic of what's happening in this book in this week's reading, for sure, is that he is day by day becoming Jake Epping less and becoming George Amberson more. And I agree. Like I like the name, but I don't dislike the name Jake. There's no Jake out there that's like, what the fuck, man? But like George Amberson, I agree with you. I totally agree with you on that. It's great.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Of course, amber is the color of my energy. I don't know if you.
Yeah, that's great. That's me too, man.
I did want to talk about one thing here. So he's in Louisiana. He kind of adorably calls the librarian of his local library back in Florida because he realizes he inadvertently left a book in his car and just feels bad about it, which is just a delightful little character trait there. But the book in question I thought was interesting and worth talking about here because there's a lot of books referenced in these two chapters, and this is kind of not the first one, but one of the ones I think is worth talking about here is a book called The Chapman Report. This is I think it was the fourth bestseller of 1960, and it's an interesting reference here. It's not a book that I've read, but I did look it up and read about it a little bit, and it's basically a book that's kind of talking about a series of interviews that were conducted with some women in this small town on sexuality and their sexual habits of these married women. And it's very much a book of its time in that, the 60s is this kind of called this decade of kind of sexual awakening and a sexy decade, we can call it. And this book came out in 1960 and was kind of like a precursor maybe, or a symbol of the way the rest of the decade was going to go, that like this book came out and people were like, oh, this is interesting. I want to read about this. I want to learn about this. We're going to start to pry into human sexuality in a way that we never have before. And there is, I think, a common theme amongst the books referenced in this novel, that they are all kind of these, not like, I'm trying to think of the word, like they're books dealing with generational issues and the changing nature of people, and the generational values kind of thing. Like Catcher in the Rye is a great example of this. We'll talk about that later. Even of Mice and Men, I think a little bit here.
Yeah.
And it's like we're definitely like this definitely is an intentional choice, I think, of King. He's not just like Googling what books came out in 1960. He's making choices about, like he always does this, right? He always, like when he references a story within his story, it's always a deliberate, intentional choice. And so I just wanted to call this one out here.
Yeah, I think it's good that you did, because I had never heard of the Chapman Report, and honestly, I was just confused. Like, as a reference, it just left me confused, because I was like, is the Chapman Report, is this some kind of like JFK assassination document that he left in the car? And it's like, no, it's a library book from the past.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, why is he reading a report? So anyway, it went totally over my head. So I appreciate the added context, and I totally agree with you, by the way, that he, Jake is, I think, interested in the changes that are happening in this society, which I think is really interesting, because like he knows how this all shakes out.
Yeah, right.
But that doesn't mean that it's not relevant to understand, like, well, but what is it? But what is happening in this moment? What is like, how do people understand this moment as it is happening, rather than in retrospect? Like, those are two different things, really. I think that's a big theme of this book, is the idea of like, it's one thing to kind of know about the 60s from history books, and it's another thing to live in the 60s and have to deal with the 60s. And I'm really actually enjoying that aspect of this book, by the way, just forcing me to really think about like all the history we've learned. And we've, in the course of a normal life, you learn a lot of history, you absorb a lot of history, but a lot of it can feel very academic and arm's length. And this book is, I think, doing a good job at reminding me very viscerally, like, didn't feel that way to the people at the time, which is obvious, of course, but it still bears repeating sometimes, I think.
Yeah, and I wonder if this is a book he's read already in the future and is specifically reading it again in the past to like refresh his mind of the context of what culture and society was like in this time. I don't know if there's any specific evidence for or against that, but it did occur to me.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. One more thing I wanted to talk about on this phone call, Matt, is just, I'm going to keep giving Jake Epping a hard time here. The librarian he calls asks him where he's calling from, and the text says, "I almost told her the truth, but the hunch radar gave out a very loud single ping, and I bellowed, 'Baton Rouge!'" Oh, good, Jake. Way to pick somewhere super far away from the place you really are. Nolans.
Yeah, you could have said anything, but
it's okay. About an hour and a half drive between Baton Rouge and New Orleans. And it's like, it's the direction you're heading, man. Like, it's like if let's play devil's advocate here and be like, if someone comes in to the library and be like, "Hey, have you talked to this George guy?" It's like, "Oh yeah, he called me from Louisiana." It's like, fuck.
Right. Yeah, it's a big place.
Yes, but like, still, like, pick, like, you're smart enough to realize that, oh, this is a danger sense. Might not want to say where I'm actually at. Say fucking Alaska.
Yeah,
like,
sure.
Say New York City. Like, not like. It's just so funny that like the first thing that pinged into his brain was the place that's just an hour northwest of where he actually is, and will probably be traveling through on his way to Dallas.
Well, you're totally right, because what I was joking, because like it's not like they're gonna like go to Louisiana and just start looking. It's like they're gonna tell the bookies in the area, look out for this guy. He's a fucking giant, and he acts weird.
Yeah.
So you're right that even saying Baton Rouge was rather foolish, actually.
And it's just, I just love that he's smart enough to realize it, but not smart enough to actually do anything. Like, totally effective.
Yep.
It's like, oh good, now he'll never know you were in New Orleans.
Yep.
Yeah. So Jake heads on, and we meet up with him again in Dallas for the first time. Matt, he's sitting in Dealey Plaza. He's staring up at the Texas School Book Depository, from whose 6th floor corner window Oswald would take an aim and take that shot that changes the world. He feels, Matt, evil emanating from this building. Importantly, I think evil on the same level as he felt when looking at the Kitchener Ironworks, where he heard the slumbering Pennywise, or at least like a taste of the evil of Pennywise, kind of call out to him. And this is really interesting here. You know, we're doing a lot of work in this chapter specifically to paint Dallas as this really shitty place, comparable to Derry. I love when he's like, oh yeah, you know, it's the double continent surrounded by vowels. It's the same. It's totally same. But
yeah,
this is interesting to me on a personal note, because like, it is not very often in King novels that I'm reading of a place that I live and that I've been to. Like, I've been to the Book Depository. It's a museum now. It's called the 6th Floor Museum. It's a pretty cool museum. If you're in Dallas, you should probably go see it. Go check it out. I've looked out that window. I've been in Dealey Plaza. I used to work downtown and just like a couple blocks from Dealey Plaza, and so I was in that area all the time. And like, I certainly do think that there's this weird sense of history when you're in that area. They're just like, this is the place where an incredibly important, life-changing thing happened. Like that, like you feel that. It's the same way you feel if you go to New York City and go to the World Trade Center Memorial. Like, you feel the weight of this thing that happened there. But like, did I feel like a sense of evil lurking in the shadows of the Book Depository? No, not really. But then again, I don't think I've ever really felt that in my life. I don't know. It's just a little weird.
So nothing whispered to you while you
were...
No,
nothing told me to come in and hurt people.
Well, I am glad to know at this point that we both live in, evil shitholes, according to Stephen King. I live in Castle Rock, and you live in Dallas, which are two of the most evil cities in America. Of course, one of which is fictional, but that's okay. Yes, I live in a fictional city. So what? No, it's great. I mean, it's very funny to me that he depicts Dallas so poorly. I'm a bit offended, and I'm not even from Dallas.
I'm not. I mean, I think a lot of what he says in this chapter about Dallas is like remarkably accurate. In that, like, he paints it as this kind of weird, you know, there's multiple descriptions here. Like, Dallas is kind of known in Texas as being a little bit more of the snooty yuppie, to use a word that people don't use anymore, like city. Like, you know, like Austin is like the hippie place, right? Houston is the oil baron place, and Dallas has, like, you know, it's like the supposedly high class people that think they're like hot shit type people. And he describes Dallas that way even back in the 60s, which I think is really interesting, because I mean, people might not know, but like in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, Dallas was like the proto Silicon Valley. Like, a lot of tech stuff was happening in Dallas. And it was like a very different place than it is now. But I don't know, like, I like my city, but I don't love my city. And like, there's parts of it that I'm like, oh, this place sucks. and so there's parts of his description of Dallas, I'm like, yeah, I can see that, for sure. Like, I love the description of the skyscrapers. It says the skyscrapers of which the editorial spoke were an island of architectural blah, surrounded by rings of what I came to think as the Great American Flat Cut.
Yeah. I don't know, man. I feel like it's funny. I don't know. I don't have a point. I guess it's just funny to me how often people's criticisms of Dallas or various places in general are just like, oh, it's so flat. I'm just like, so what? like why does a place need to have hills for you to live in it? It doesn't.
Hills are pretty.
Hills are kind of pretty, but you can get used to not hills. I don't know. I guess this is a pet peeve of mine, is people being like, oh, it's so flat.
I do think it's weird, and this is less true now, but like the way Dallas is set up, it's like there's downtown, which, by the way, for people that don't live in Dallas, like downtown Dallas is not like a downtown in other cities you've heard of, like very few people live in downtown Dallas. Most people just work there, and so it's a place that's like incredibly crowded during weekdays, and then like on the weekends is largely dead. And this is changing. Like they're working to change. They're trying to build up Dallas as like a destination, like a place you want to live in the actual city proper, but not fully successful yet. And there's just suburbs like completely surrounding the city. And so like, and again, this has changed because the suburbs have continued to grow and expand out. But there's this really weird thing that happens in most cities, but I think it's very specific in Dallas, that for whatever reason, the suburbs of Dallas like grew north, but then like south of the city, like it just didn't grow that far. So like there's a few suburbs south of the city, and then there's just like nothing. It's just like, it's barren. It's like there's just nothing there, and it's weird. I wonder, like, obviously King has been to Dallas at some point in his life, probably, right? And I'm gleaning from the way he writes about it here that he did not have a good experience here. But I think it is interesting the way he just like has decided that like, oh, this is the Derry of the South.
Yeah, I mean, the one place where I'm kind of on the same page with him is that it is kind of an architecturally drab city. I will agree with that.
They've been working on, like, there's a bunch of, like, the uptown area of Dallas has been growing like just exponentially, and like they're putting up new skyscrapers that I think are a little bit more interesting looking. But
okay, cool. Yeah, I haven't seen that. But yeah, before we move on from Texas Schoolbook Depository, this isn't even a joke. It's just me saying, for the record, that every single time I hear Texas Schoolbook Depository, I just think of the Simpsons gag, let's go to the Texas Cheesecake Depository. And I just involuntarily have that association. So now
that's great.
I've inflicted it upon you as well.
Yeah, thank you. Now I will never be able to take this seriously ever again.
Yep, good.
I mean, I don't know. Have you ever been to the book depository?
Nope.
It's just like, it's so like, again, the weirdness of the way history unfolds. It's just this kind of squat little box of a building with 6 floors. It doesn't look remarkable in any way, except that we know what happened there.
Yeah. The mundanity of evil.
Yeah. It's wild. So I think, Jake basically decides in this moment that he doesn't like Dallas too much, and like what he's looking for a place to stay. Like, I think he's basically decided, I'm going to stay in Dallas while Lee Harvey Oswald is in Fort Worth, and then when Oswald moves to Fort Worth moves to Dallas from Fort Worth, I'll move over to Fort Worth, and that's his plan. And so he's looking for a place in North Dallas. And once again, I have this weird surrealness when he's like talking about streets that I know. He's like, I found a place off Blackwell Street, and it's right near Greenville Avenue. And I'm like, I know those places. Like Blackwell Street, for those that don't know, like people probably know about North Park Mall in Dallas because it's like the bougie rich people mall that is incredibly popular in Dallas. It's so Dallas. It's like the most Dallas thing ever. And that's like right across the highway from Blackwell Street. So it's funny. And then of course Lower Greenville is like a huge happening place in Dallas. It was at the time and for decades afterwards described exactly how it's described here in this book. But Lower Greenville has now become like the high scale, high class bars and restaurants area. They basically completely gentrified it. And there's a St. Patrick's Day parade every year that goes down it, which is, it's just weird reading about it in this and knowing what it is now. It's weird. It's just this is a weird experience for me that I personally have never experienced, because there's not another King book that I've read that's like, oh, I know these places. I live in these places.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of, I'm not going to say this is definitely true, but it really does feel like King visited Dallas, like possibly even while writing this book for research.
Yeah.
Because a lot of it just feels very true to life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I wonder what happened to him. like why he obviously left it with a taste in his mouth, and not a good one. But I wonder why.
Yeah, we'll have to ask him.
It's fucking hot. I mean,
what do you have against
that's probably
Dallas,
part
man?
of it. He probably came in August. which don't come to Texas in August. Just don't do it.
Yeah. Unless you live here and you have the chance to get used to it. Don't do that to yourself.
I love this kind of anecdote with his landlord though. He basically he says this is the only place in the city he's been looking for weeks. This is the only place in the city he found livable, but he'd have to put up with this incredibly racist landlord. And like then he has a conversation with him, which by the way we talked about. I didn't even remember what book it was, but we talked about the story of Moses and his sons, and how some people used the one son seeing his father naked as like, this is why black people are inferior, some stupid bullshit, right? That and then we see this guy here echo that same sentiment. It's like, God, these people suck. But like, I don't know. I think it's really interesting, this idea that he basically is like immediately like, I can't put up with this. Like, I can't put up with this. Like, Dallas is a big city. It's bigger now. Like the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex is one of the biggest like metroplexes in the world. But the city of Dallas itself, I looked this up at the time, was about 700,000 people. The city proper now is about double that. But it's a big place. And I just have a hard time believing that in the 2 weeks he looked for an apartment in Dallas, this was the only one he could find. Like, and I don't want to go too far because I'm just like making hypothesis here, but it feels like he just immediately didn't like this place and is looking for any possible excuse to not have to stay here.
I mean, I had the same feeling that it's more about the vibe, and maybe there's a supernatural component to that vibe, right? Like I was legitimately thinking about the fact that like this feels like more past working against him stuff here. Like it's not that there's a tree falling across the path of his car. It's a much subtler play where it's like it's not a concrete obstruction. It's an abstract, like, not like, this just sucks. I can't see myself staying here, and it's like a force field pushing him away from Dallas in all these different subtle ways. Like I don't know how much of this is true, but if you read the story with the idea of like, is the past sort of nudging him and guiding him now rather than like throwing up overt obstacles, then there's a lot that might be that if you're looking for it.
Yeah, I mean, we can come right out and say it. Like, does the past bring Sadie to him to keep him from John F. Kennedy? Right? Like, yeah, we don't know. But I mean, it's interesting. we're personifying the past and giving it like motivation, when before it's just seemed like, yeah, the past doesn't like things being changed. But Jake's presence, as you said, is changing everything. Like he took $12,000 away from a gangster. Like that's going to change things for sure. We'll see as he gets to Jodie, he's going to change a lot of people in Jodie just by his presence there radically. Yeah. And we don't see any like hurdles by the obdurate past to stop with that. So yeah, I mean, it kind of, you question and wonder like, how is this operating? How is the obdurance of the past picking and choosing its battles?
Right. I mean, and one way to think of that is that, well, it's not obstructing him anymore because it's using him for the roles that it wants now. Instead of letting him to make the decisions.
Yeah. No, I like that. Yeah. I like that. But anyway, the next day, Jake departs Dallas and heads south on U.S. Highway 77, which is a real highway, and then west on Highway 109, which is not a real highway. And he stops at a little town called Jodie, population 1,280. And the reason that he stops at Jodie, Matt, is because he sees a diner in the center of town called Al's Diner. I love the line. Of course it was.
Yeah. No, I mean, like, in all seriousness, this is exactly the kind of shit that Ka pulls all the time, where it kind of steers him where it wants him by putting these signs in place, you know?
Yeah. And I think we should say here that Jodie isn't real. Like, there is not a real town south of Dallas called Jodie, but it could be. Like, I think Jodie stands for like a snapshot of what a small Texas town is, but definitely definitely an idealized version of a small Texas town. And I think that's interesting in and of itself, right? After 40 odd years of King writing about the evil that abounds in small towns, suddenly the big city is evil, and it's a little Jodie that seems in essence pure, right? Like it is a town that is almost unbelievably good. Like integration has happened here. And everyone's cool with it. Actually, everyone's just like, yeah, no, it's great. Our football team got better.
Yeah.
And it's just like everyone's fine with it. It's like there's none of the problems that seem to plague the rest of the world are present in Jodie, and Jake just immediately falls in love with it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with you that it's as much as Stephen King seems to hate towns sometimes, I don't think he just categorically thinks towns are a bad idea and we should do away with them.
Mm-hmm.
And this is clearly a great community, a great town, a great place. And obviously, I don't know, not obviously, but like once again, that seems like even more of a trap for Jake. Like, we've given you this real life here. Like you don't. It's not just a game you're playing anymore. Like this is really, like you really live here. These are your people. People care about you here. You care about them. You're just going to leave because the mission is over.
Yeah. I agree with you. I love the idea that it's a trap. I also love the idea that like Jake, you're playing fast and loose with people, right? Like this is a guy who's going to spend the next 2 years in this town, then save the president and then disappear. And it's like, but wait, like the more you establish a life in this place, the more your presence and lack of presence will affect people. Like we've got this thing set up with Sadie, right? That we basically been told is going to form a romantic relationship. And it's like, well, wait a minute here. Like what happens when you get the fuck out of town and go walk up your stairs again? Like, this is he's I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but it's very clear that Jake is like what he wants almost as soon as he sees this town is no longer to save the life of the president of the United States. He just wants to live in this town. And it's like the conflict that's being brought up right now is not, will I succeed in my mission or will the obdurate past stop me? But it's like, will Jake, by the time it's November 1963, even want to do the mission anymore?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I again, it's impossible to say for sure, but it does really feel like the past has shifted tactics and it instead of actively opposing him, it's just going to make it so that he no longer wishes to follow through on this. I think I'm just forgetting, and the book probably did tell us, but I'm sort of forgetting why did Al fail, like concretely? Like why did Al not stop Oswald? Was it because
he got sick? He just got too sick and he had to bail.
Okay, but he saw Oswald. So I think I'm asking a slightly stupider question, which I guess is like, why didn't he just shoot Oswald when he had the chance? And it's like, well, he didn't really have the chance. He couldn't have gotten away with it.
So. So basically, the point that Al has decided and that Jake has kind of adopted is the attempted assassination of a general that is done by Oswald in early 1963. So he basically needed to prove that Oswald was the one that did it. And so it is known that the ballistics from the gun that attempted to shoot that general was the same gun that shot Kennedy. And so if he observes Oswald take that shot, even though he missed, then he knows that it was him and that he can kill him. And I think he just gets too sick before he hits that point. But I mean, you are correct that we don't know. Like the assumption has to be that Al made a similar life here as well, right? Like maybe not in Jodie, of course, but like living in the past, he began to live in the past. Like I turn your attention once again to the Texas flag on the gnome that he had in front of his house. Like this is a guy who spent 5 years almost in the 1960s, and as we're seeing Jake kind of transform into George Amberson, presumably Al did as well.
Yeah, I think there's a strong possibility that Al had other reasons for not following through with the mission beyond just, oh, he got sick. Like, yeah, I'm sure that was
maybe.
I don't think he was lying necessarily, but I think maybe it was more complicated, and he found himself more enmeshed, kind of like what's happening to Jake.
I like that. So at Al's diner, Jake meets with Deke Simmons, the principal of the local high school, and Mimi Cochran, the librarian, and also Deke's lover and the one that really runs the school. Matt, I love Mimi. I love Miss Mimi so much. I love her. This is one of those like just king characters that is just like immediately defined and realized, and you just like know her and understand her and love her like right away. In fact, I was convinced going into this week's reading that Miss Mimi was in a much larger chunk of this book than she was in. She dies in these chapters we're reading this week, and that shocked me. I did not remember her. Like, I knew eventually she was going to have to go because I knew Sadie was coming and was going to take her job, but I thought she was around more. It just felt like her presence in every scene she's in is so big that I really, really thought she was around more.
It's funny, despite the fact that this is the first time I read it, I kind of agree. She lives large. She looms large in these pages.
Mm-hmm.
She is this, wise old elf character, like what we've seen in some other books. I was actually thinking about the fact that it's like part of how you can tell if a town is going to be an evil town or a good town is like the quality of the old people. And like, if the old people in the town are like hateful, twisted creatures, then it's a bad town. And if the old people of the town are like Mimi Corcoran, then it's a good town, because it's like they've got these, wise old elves protecting the town, kind of keeping the fire going.
I like that. Yeah.
And so that's, I was paying particular attention to the role that Mimi plays in this town, because she kind of she seems to play a big role, like in the social fabric of the town. And we see that everybody loves her, that she's more important to the town than you would just think, like, oh, she works at the school. It's like, no, she's this important, social pillar, actually.
Yeah, totally. Completely agree. And you can tell almost instantly that Mimi sees through Jake's story. like we're introduced to her as this incredibly observant, like quizzical person that, like, some people aren't going to ask Jake about the details of his story, but some people are. And Mimi it seems like absolutely one of those people, but she almost doesn't care, because she quizzes him on The Catcher in the Rye, what he thinks about it and if it should be in the school library. And Jake, chooses to tell the truth here, which I love.
Yeah.
I love, by the way. I love how he approaches this.
No, it's a very fun scene, because, I think Jake's narration of the story sort of telegraphs the kind of person that Mimi is. So you're hoping Jake doesn't blow it, but in the opposite direction of how he's afraid he'll blow it.
Yeah.
Which makes for a fun sort of layered dramatic irony.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree. I also just love the it should be checked out only to certain students at the librarian's discretion. The librarians, not the parents. No, ma'am. That's a slippery slope. And then she just immediately loves it.
Yeah, that's great.
I think it's worth talking about The Catcher in the Rye here for a second, though, Matt. What do you think? What do you think of the novel? Like, The Catcher in the Rye has clearly been. This is the second time it's been referenced in the last few pages. What are we doing with The Catcher in the Rye here?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure, but Jake sort of tells us, he says The Catcher in the Rye, it's about how a lot of stuff was bad in the 50s and how it could be better. I'm paraphrasing, obviously. But, The Catcher in the Rye is about a kid who is devastated by the death of a sibling. And yet he almost never actually explicitly thinks about this fact in the novel.
Yeah.
And then he wanders around and gets in a lot of uncomfortable situations. And it's kind of interesting, because like that book doesn't really map on to 11/22/63 terribly well, but you could squint your eyes and say that Jake Epping is a sort of Holden Caulfield like figure. He's not complaining about people being phonies all the time, but he is complaining about how people in his own time aren't nice and accommodating the way these people are. So there's a sort of stripe of that. And also, he's not saying that he wants to catch the children who are running off the cliff. in the Rye, but he's saying that he wants to save the president and stop Vietnam. And in a sense, they're both Holden Caulfield and Jake Epping are protecting the innocent. And I guess I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here and say the same could be true of Mice and Men, where you have a character, the protagonist of that story is also making a lot of choices to protect and shield the innocent against the terribleness of the world, and feeling a lot of resentment for the way the world is. So they don't match incredibly well, but I think there is a through line to be found.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think that holding Jake up as a catcher in the Rye is I think a pretty great comparison. And yeah, I mean, I think it also ties into what we've been talking about with just like the world on the cusp of this great kind of upheaval, generationally and societally. Is that a word? Societally?
Yeah,
sure. And this is another book that has long been kind of the book for like, like YA fiction before YA fiction was a thing, right? That this kind of generational angst at the way things are,
right?
And wanting to preserve innocence, but futilely.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think they're books about generational angst for different generations. But by that I mean Of Mice and Men and Catcher in the Rye, respectively.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. And a lot of people don't like The Catcher in the Rye. Like, what do you think about it? I think that it feels like there's been a backlash to Catcher in the Rye because it was like it like became like the text for like, this is what being a teenager is like. And I think people resent it for that. I've always enjoyed the book.
Yeah.
I don't love it, but I enjoyed my time with it.
I think it's a great book. What's funny is I just don't necessarily agree that it's a book about what being a teenager is like. I think it's actually a specific character who does. I mean, he does capture a very sort of typical teenage attitude of arrogance coupled with insecurity, right? But that's just a small part of what that book is doing. And it's a nice short book. It's hard to be too mad at a book that's short.
No, sure.
Doesn't overstay its welcome. No, I enjoy the book. Yeah,
me too. All right, so Jake takes the job that he's offered to be a substitute at the high school, and here we go. His life in Jodie, Texas begins. But from here, we're told specifically that he fucks up. He makes another bet on the World Series, and it's not exactly because he needed the money. I really like this line. It was based less on the love of money than on the intoxicating knowledge that I could beat the unusually unbeaten house whenever I wanted to. It's like, oh, good, Jake. Good.
Yeah, that's so just drawing more attention to yourself on purpose, basically.
So Jake wins, of course, collects the money, and heads back to Jodie, Texas, convinced he's safe. We're led to believe otherwise, though, right? Like, I think the interesting thing about the way King sets this up is we're told at the beginning of the section, and then I made a mistake. And the mistake was to place this bet. But we don't get to see the payoff of that mistake, right? Like, he just heads back to Jodie, and that's kind of left dangling in front of us. Like, it must eventually pay off. Why was it a mistake? How was it a mistake? In what way does that mistake, come to fruition in his story? We don't get any of that. It's just King sets it up and then leaves it here. Why do you think he made this structural decision?
Well, I think I just formed a prediction while you were talking.
Okay.
So the prediction is that, proximally, so that we can never relax and just enjoy things. But more specifically, I think that the mobsters are going to come after him, and they're going to shoot at him, but they're going to hit Sadie, and Sadie's going to die. And then it's going to be like, well, shit. Now, are you going to save JFK in the timeline where your actions caused Sadie to be killed? Because that doesn't, like, that's you don't care about JFK, you care about Sadie. So now what are you going to do, Jake? So that's what's going to happen.
That's fun. I like that. Well, We will find out.
All right.
But not for a while, because we just leave this little element behind and move forward in time.
All right.
But one thing we do as the chapter closes, Matt, that I think is really interesting. It basically, what we're told here is that Jake says, we're going to take another leap forward in time. But before that happens, I need to recount one more thing from 1960 first. And that thing is Jake hiding out in Fort Worth in November to basically observe Lee Harvey Oswald's mother and older brother. And what we see here is that his mother is awful. Just the fucking worst. Just a terrible human being, basically.
Yeah, it's a very interesting touch. I personally had never heard a single thing about Oswald's mother before this moment in this story. Presumably this is somewhat accurate. Like, she was a horrible person, I'm guessing.
I have to assume so. But maybe not. Maybe it's just functional for the story King's wanting to tell here. But I see no reason to doubt that she was just probably not a great person, and he had at very least had an estranged relationship with her.
Yeah, overbearing and bad.
So we see kind of Mama Oswald chastise Lee's older brother publicly, demanding money, and just, as you said, being overbearing and miserable and awful. I love how she's described. Matching lipstick outlined a small mouth that looked dissatisfied and pugnacious, the mouth of a woman who believes the world is against her and has had plenty of evidence over the years to prove it. I love that description.
Yeah, me too.
But this whole interaction in this chapter ends with this note. He heads back to Jodie, shaken and thoughtful. I wouldn't see Lee Oswald for another year and a half, and I remained determined to stop him. But I already felt more sympathy for him than I ever had for Frank Dunning. So, Matt, why? Why are we doing this?
It is interesting. I mean, if you understand where a person came from, why they are the way they are, it's harder to condemn them quite as fully. So,
sure.
It's interesting that we're putting Jake in this position of having a little bit of sympathy. And also, just, I mean, linguistically, I think it's really fascinating that he calls him Lee Oswald here, which jumped out to me even when I was listening to it, because there's almost like the meme that we always call assassins by their three names, Lee Harvey Oswald, John Wilkes Booth, and so calling him Lee Oswald, it's like, well, that's not so weird. It's like, well, it is kind of weird. Nobody calls him that. They call him Oswald, or they call him Lee Harvey Oswald. I don't think in this book or in life have I ever heard somebody just call him Lee Oswald, right? So it's a kind of indicator of like seeing him as a man, seeing him as just a man, as this woman's son, and not the great historic assassin Lee Harvey Oswald. It struck me in the moment.
I like that. I like that a lot. That's a great point. I didn't catch that myself, but you're absolutely right. Like, it feels intentional that we left out the world famous assassin moniker here by just calling him Lee. And it's not to say that like the purpose of the book is going to be to actually show how Lee Harvey Oswald was a good dude, actually.
Right.
Certainly not. But I do think what we're doing is like setting up the building blocks for Jake's reticence to carry out the mission. Like, between the life he's building for himself and Jodie and the complicated feelings he's developing towards the would-be assassin, like, it just seems like we're setting this up as like, okay, is he gonna want to do this anymore eventually?
It just seems less important.
Yeah. All right, chapter 13. We catch back up with Jake all the way into the future, and his past the It's May of 1961. He's been living in Jodie, Texas for the better part of a year, and we see him being visited by one of the kids from school. This is Michael Coslaw. I want to say coleslaw, but I know that's not it. I want to say Michael Coleslaw because that's very funny, but I think it's just Coslaw.
Coslaw, yeah. Coslaw, yeah.
And the lead in his play, and this is a watershed moment, speaking of the phrase, for Jake here, because it says, I should remember it. It was when I stopped living in the past and just started living. Wow. Huge.
Yeah. And I love this chapter, by the way. It's, we kind of set aside all the crazy time travel stuff, and we just have a nice little, story. It's kind of a short story in this chapter.
this is definitely part of my favorite parts of the book. Is this stuff in Jodie as Jake becomes George Amberson and is just living his life in Jodie, Texas. And yeah, you're right. Like the way this chapter is structured is really interesting because it is first and foremost a story about a teacher trying to help a student and, mourning the loss of a friend and meeting a new girl. Like the Kennedy stuff is there. And I love the way King kind of backgrounds it constantly, where it's like, he'll be just doing something and then it's like, and I thought about that Lee Oswald and his wife were getting married right about now, so like he never lets it fully fade into the background completely. We're always constantly reminded of Lee Oswald and see, I just did it. Lee Harvey Oswald and Kennedy and the mission that's awaiting him. We're never allowed to fully forget it, but it's definitely backgrounded here. And yeah, I agree with you. I love all this stuff.
Yeah.
So Jake catches us up with what's going on, saying he was pressured by Mimi to take on the school play after the normal teacher got sick. This is a production of Mice and Men. His lead, Mike, here is playing Lenny, and he's here with stage fright. And you already talked about of Mice and Men a little bit, Matt, but do you want to go into any of this in any more detail?
I mean, yeah, just the idea that both of these books that we've talked about are kind of about different periods in American history where the common people feel let down and isolated and alienated, which I think resonates with the way Jake feels. I also think it's relevant to point out that his pseudonym here is George Amberson, and the main character of Mice and Men is George. His name George. So I don't know. That feels, I don't know, intentional or meaningful in some sense, right? Like I mean, especially considering, I don't know. Am I saying that Jake had the protagonist of Mice and Men in mind when he picked his pseudonym? Not really. In fact, I don't think he picked it. I think
Al picked it. Al set all that up for him.
Al picked it. So, which means Stephen King picked it. So, I think that's there, right? We never focus on this, but it's possible, right? And I think one more comment here is just like these are stories about innocence, and I think one thing about the JFK assassination, which maybe we talked about earlier some previous week, but like some people view the JFK assassination as this moment where America lost its innocence, and nothing was ever the same afterward. And more metaphysically than just like, it's a tragedy when the president is assassinated. It's like, no, something changed, something shifted. People didn't see eye to eye anymore after that because it was just such a dramatic thing. So Jake is sort of trying to protect innocence, to protect America's innocence here. I like that.
No, definitely. But of course, the scene in question here is the scene at the end of the novel where George kills Lenny to save him a much more painful and excruciating death, to keep his innocence by killing him, which is there. I mean, there's a lot there, certainly, right? Like what are we saying with that essentially?
I mean, absolutely. I think it's it's unclear what role Jake will actually end up serving versus what he thinks he's doing, right? I'm trying to remember, does Holden have is there a gun at any point in Catcher in the Rye?
Oh, gosh, I don't know. Probably.
I vaguely feel like there was, and obviously, this scene at the end of Mice and Men, he shoots Lenny, and then we've got explicitly the shooting of JFK. I'm just wondering if that's another piece of connective tissue there, but I can't actually remember if there's a gun in Catcher in the Rye or not. So.
It is unfortunate that it's been quite a while since I've read Catcher in the Rye, so I'm not like fully versed in the details of the plot movements, but well, anyway,
it's possible.
Yeah. But I love this. Like, there's so much good stuff in here, and almost none of it relates to like the direct plot in front of us. Like, I love this. People think I am, he said in a low voice. The context here is that he's dumb, and I'm strictly a C student. Maybe you don't know that. Maybe subs don't get to see the records, but I am. I made it a point to see yours after the second week of rehearsals when I saw what you could do on stage. You're a C student because as a football player, you're supposed to be a C student. It's part of the ethos. The what? Figure it out from context and save the dumb act for your friends. Like, I think what we're doing here, and this is actually really important, I think. Mimi comes to him later and basically makes the argument that, hey, you're a pretty good writer, but really what you're meant to be is a teacher. This is what you're meant to do. Not an assassin of assassins, not a storyteller, but a teacher, a person that can see kids that need something and knows how to give it to them. And I feel like we need to believe that, right? Like, we can't just be told from Mimi that that's the truth. Like, we need to believe that. And I think this scene goes a long way to that. Like, the way he talks to Mike here, like the perfect, like, figure it out from the context and save the dumb act for your friends. Like, he understands Mike on a level that probably nobody else in the school does. Like, he gets him, and he gets that, like, he's pretending to be stupid because that's the role he's supposed to fill.
Yeah.
And he knows exactly how to attack him with that. And I just, like, I love it. It's so good. It's so interesting. And it really helps define this guy as, like, we're not just saying he's a good teacher. We're showing that he's a good teacher.
Yeah. I love what you just said about like he can maybe do some amazing amount of good for the world by just being a teacher. Like, that's his cause to be a teacher. This is his purpose, and it's like, but he thinks he has to be a gunslinger. He thinks he has to go be this action hero, basically. And it's like, that's not who you are. Like, you barely got through, like, the much easier mission of Frank Dunning. And it's definitely not your natural skill set, man. It's just interesting to think about, like, maybe, I don't know, really, like, the book could go any direction, obviously, but it would be interesting to consider, like, maybe everything would have been better off if he had just been a teacher. And like, even if he saves JFK, maybe things would have been better off if he had just been a teacher. Like,
yeah. I mean, who's to know, like, what the kid you pull out of their shell in high school will go on to do, right? Like, this is, we know definitively that when JFK dies, and we can save him, but to what end? But, people, teachers that live every day are saving kids or elevating kids. I mean, it is absolutely true here, Matt, that without Jake in Jodie, Mike is not getting on stage and acting and not discovering his love of acting, which will undoubtedly change his life forever.
Yeah.
Like, even if he doesn't like, say, I'm going to become an actor instead of doing football in college, like, even if that doesn't happen, it's going to change him fundamentally as a person. He has this thing inside him that, and he's for the first time realized he's really, really good at something, and he really, really likes it. And so, like, yeah, I mean, the obdurate past, right? We've fundamentally changed this teenager now.
Yeah.
To what end? I don't know.
Yeah, I can't wait to see.
I do like we talked about the appropriateness of Mice and Men as a story within this story thematically, but I also feel like it's just like a cheat code in that most people have either read or watched one of the many adaptations of Mice and Men, and so most people are pretty aware of this movie, especially this final scene, and we know how sad and, like, I get choked up every time I watch it. We know, and we can kind of visualize in our head what a good performance of the scene would be. And so King gets to just basically have, like, and Mike did this scene and he was really good at it. And we're like, you're right. It's so good. Like, you just imagine what that is, because you've seen it before probably, or read it before. And so it is kind of a little cheat code. I love Of Mice and Men. I think it's a great book. I really love, many of the movies. There's been so many adaptations of this thing, but I think it's a great story and I really, really like it. And it's, I got a little choked up here at the lines in this. It's just very, very good.
Yeah. I think it also, I mean, it just helps you buy that, like, this theater full of people would be openly weeping because it is that powerful of a story. I've only ever, it's funny. I've watched the movie with Gary Sinise and Malkovich, and I've actually watched an opera adaptation of all things of Mice and Men. It's the only opera I've ever been to in my life.
I've never been to the opera. Isn't that weird? I feel like I definitely would have been to the opera at this point in my life.
I mean, the thing is, like, the only reason I went is somebody invited me. It's not the kind of thing where I would be like, you know what, I feel like doing this weekend? Opera. Not that I have anything against it. It's just not my thing. So anyway, yes, I agree with you that it's cheap.
If you've never been to it.
Well, that's fair. I think
green eggs and ham, Matt. I teach this to my son every day. You gotta try it.
Fair enough. And they've got Mice and Men operas out there for you to watch. So
I mean, that the biggest like reason, I guess, that I haven't been to the opera is this conception that like most of the operas are just a story in another language that I don't speak. And that like maybe I'll be able to follow through the beauty of the performances, but just feel like I would prefer to understand the language everyone's saying. But I know that's a misconception. Like not all operas are in Italian, right? Like this is not...
I mean, you could still just appreciate the virtuosity of the singing, but the thing is they're very long. So at a certain amount of virtuosity of singing, I'm just like, okay, they're great. They're great singers. They're amazing. I get it. And then you're kind of done. So at least of Mice and Men was in English though. So
yeah.
Now everybody's gonna go watch the ending scene of Mice and Men on YouTube.
Oh, I immediately did that after reading this part, like right away.
And then I watched the ending of Tales from Ba Sing Se. And then I was just crying and
I didn't know that the Sinise and Malkovich one was from 1992. I guess it's one of those things that like I was a kid when I first heard of it and just assumed it was a movie that existed forever. It's like, no, this came out when I was 7, actually.
Yeah, I guess I never thought about it. That makes sense.
This is like when I learned that Aliens came out in 1986, and I was like, no. There's no way I could have been alive when this movie that has been out forever came out.
Right. I always feel that way about Star Wars too, where I'm like, Star Wars came out either in the past or much, much later.
Yeah, it's wild that Return of the Jedi only came out like 3 years before we were born. 2 years before we were born.
Right.
Which is just, it doesn't seem like that's possible, but yeah.
Yep.
So I want to read this line here. Mike was gone. The stage was gone. Now it was only the two of them. And by the time Lenny was asking George to tell him about the little ranch and the rabbits and living fat off the land, half the audience was weeping audibly. Vince was crying so hard he could hardly deliver his final lines, telling poor stupid Lenny to look over there. The ranch that they were going to live on was over there. If he looked hard enough, he could see it. Matt, I know we've said this before, but I'm just going to repeat it again here. This is a book about a man going back in time to prevent the JFK assassination. That's what this book is about.
And we have some tangents, is what you're saying. We have
it was just a beautifully written paragraph about a performance of Mice and Men in a high school drama department.
Yeah. I was. It's funny what like not like the art form of the novel is naturally this like sprawling thing. Actually, I know this is a highly meta comment, but just to riff on what you just said there, like it's just interesting how like some of my favorite novels end up being the things that have these like absolute oxbows that don't really, I mean, it's not that they don't matter, but they don't go anywhere, right? Or we're just like, we're establishing something that's going to matter thematically, maybe narratively, but mostly thematically, right? I don't know. It's just I love this though. Like this is the great thing about a nice big fat novel to me.
Yeah, I totally agree. This is the heart of it. This is the meat of it. This is the stuff that I really, really like. And yeah, the overarching plot and the mission here is what propels us through the conflict of the story. But these are always the parts that I like the most.
Yeah.
So 3 weeks later, Jake finds Mimi waiting outside his place. We learn that Jake has edited together the murder place, switching it from Derry to Dallas to match the story that he told Mimi. And Mimi's been begging him to read the book. He finally relents, and she's here to bring it back to him. And she says that, it's good.
Yeah.
It's not bad. It's good. It'll probably get published. But writing a novel isn't what Jake is meant to do, she says. He's meant to teach. He's a good writer, but he's a great teacher.
Yeah, I thought it was funny how he's like clearly deeply hurt by this, but I think also knows it's true.
Yeah, I love that. Like, the murder place might have begun as camouflage, but it had become more important to me as I got deeper into it. It was like a secret memoir, one of the nerves. I love that.
Yeah, it's good.
But this goes back to Jake Epping / George Amberson as our Stephen King insert character, right? Like, that it forces you to think about something like this. It's like we said, they're both 6'4". They're both were teachers, writers. So basically what I'm saying here, Matt, is that when we have a character looking at our King insert character and saying, hey, you're pretty good at writing, but really what you're great at is teaching, and what your calling is in life is teaching. And I can't help but wonder if at least in some way, partially, this is King looking back at his life in a kind of sliding doors situation. Like, what if I had not gone the novelist route? Like, what if I had fully committed to being a teacher, and that's what I decided to do for the rest of my life? Like, what would my life be like? What would that mean? And I think he's exploring these ideas through Jake, who he creates as a good teacher, a great teacher.
Yeah, or just to consider, like, what would King's life have been like if he had not been a talented novelist, or if he hadn't had natural talent? And
I mean, it's hard to look at this guy's output and be like, no, you should have been a teacher. Yeah. Like, obviously, I don't think that's true at all. Like, I think he's doing exactly what he's supposed to be doing. But yeah, I mean, I do like it as a guy in his 60s being like, how would my life? This is a book about looking back, right? Like, we said at the very beginning, this is a period in King's life where he's looking back on his past, and it's like, how would my life have been different if I never got sold carry or gave up, or someone came to me and said, hey, this is a pretty good book, Steve, but you can do so much more as a teacher, and he decides to go that route. Yeah.
Right. And maybe he has these memories of moments like this with students, where he felt like he was having an impact on them, and thinks like, what if I had just stuck with that? Like, and I had a bunch more of those stories. Like, I bet that would be meaningful. That would be a meaningful life.
Yeah. I do think it's weird. Like, again, this is, surprising everyone. I am not a world famous novelist. So I don't know what it's like to be one, but I would think that, when you're a guy that's written this many books and has touched this many people around the world with your stories, like, it can be very gratifying, but I bet it can also be pretty lonely. Mm-hmm. Like, in that a lot of your interactions with people are probably pretty impersonal. It's like, hey, this thing you wrote really moved me. It's like, that's great. I appreciate that. But like, I don't have a personal connection with you, random reader. Like, I appreciate you. I thank you. But I don't have a connection with you. Whereas in the world of teaching, like, Jake has a very personal, individual connection with Mike, and helping Mike. And like, he takes this kid, this football player who never realized he was so good at this thing, who tried out for the play as kind of a joke, and then realized he was good at it and he liked it, and he delivered him onto stage. And like that, like, the reason I thought about this is because, like, I was thinking in my head as you were talking, it was like, well, like, telling stories the way you have that have moved so many people is an incredible way of changing the world too, right? Like, dude's changed our lives, right? Yeah. We're doing this podcast, but it's not the same. That's not the same at all for you. I mean, like, for you, the individual doing the writing and releasing the stories, like, it doesn't feel the same.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, one of my bits that I say is that meaning, people struggle with meaning. And what I say is, like, meaning is just a feeling, and it's a feeling that you get from, concretely, like, knowing that you have had a positive impact in someone's life. And and it's very hard to get that feeling if it's just abstractly, statistically knowing that you had an impact in people's lives. Like, giving to charity often doesn't feel like much of anything, because it's like, well, the money goes somewhere, and then maybe something good happens with it, and you never see the consequences of it. And that's probably similar to how writing books feels. Even like you said, even if somebody thanks you for it, it's like, well, I believe you, but I wasn't there to see you have that reaction. So
right.
You don't get that. You don't get that sense of it. Whereas, like you say, this is a very meaningful moment. This is a moment that Jake's going to look back on over the rest of his life and think about how important this was to him.
Yeah. So I agree. So one other thing here, Matt, is that Mimi is clearly sick. She's not well, but she wants George to come work full time at the school. Another English teacher has retired, and she wants Jake to take this spot. And Jake, if we can tell almost immediately that he wants this job like really bad, really bad. And this is what we talked about earlier, that it's becoming very apparent that the prevention of the JFK assassination, his primary mission, is frequently not becoming his goal, but the thing preventing him from doing what he wants, actually. And that leads us to the question that I posed earlier, and I'll pose here again, is like, by the time we get to 1963, is he going to even want to do this anymore? Like, will he have created such a meaningful, specific, and real life in this time that ripping all that away no longer becomes worth it, regardless of what happens if Kennedy is assassinated?
I mean, I think it's quite possible that that's the direction we're going.
Yeah. But for now, he pushes off the decision of what he wants to do long term, because he knows that Lee won't be back in his neck of the woods until next June, and the school year will be done by then. So he can safely say, yeah, I'll teach for a year, and then I'll be done with it, and we'll be all good. So he can have his cake and eat it too, which of course we know always works out for everyone.
Yes, that's a rule of storytelling is that the character always gets what they want.
Yep. So Mimi then tells Jake she's getting married to Deke, and then resigning from the school as the two of them head to Mexico to try some experimental cancer treatments. I think it is interesting here, Matt, that we never use the word cancer here, actually. Like, and Mimi never comes out and says, I'm sick. She just these two characters just seem to have an understanding with each other, that they kind of know what's going on with each other without saying it. I really like that. And I also think, I don't know, it just seems like cancer is playing a pretty big role in the story, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I obviously Mimi and then Al. I feel, was there another character where cancer was a thing, or I feel like there was, but now I can't remember. But yeah, no, even just those two, it seems like it's a recurring motif for sure.
I really like this as well. Mimi says, life is too sweet to give up without a fight, don't you think? Yes, I said. Yes, so one holds on. She looked at me closely. Are you going to cry, George? No. I can honestly say, Matt, that the recurring beat throughout the story of I'm not a man known to cry, that we like that defined our first line of the book, and then we see it again after he learns of Mimi's death. I'm not exactly a crying man. Like, is a through line that I did not specifically notice on my previous reads of this book, but I really like it as this like defining characteristic of Jake, that like literally the first sentence of the novel, and it's a through line for sure.
Yeah, no, it's great. I love this. I mean, the interesting thing to me is that it's not like Jake is this hardened, sociopath. Like, far from it. He's a very deep and humane character. Yeah. There's just this one thing where it just takes a lot to really push him to that point where he really, I don't want to say it's just like, oh, he just doesn't cry easily. It's like I think it's hard for him to feel the kind of sorrow required to cry.
Yeah. And of course, the rule of storytelling seems to indicate that we're going to be pushing Jake towards that, right?
Yes, yes.
Like you don't play a beat multiple times where the end of the end of the beats is just like, and I never did cry. The end.
Yes, right. Yes, Jake Epping may not be a great novelist, but he chose to begin his story of his time travel adventure the way he did. So
yeah. Mm-hmm. One other thing Mimi reveals here is that she basically knows that Jake's entire story is bullshit, that he's not hiding as well as he thinks he is, right? Like, I love the detail of, like, you said your book takes place in Dallas, but everyone in this book clearly speaks with a New England accent. You even left a yup in it a couple times. You clearly speak with a New England accent. And also there's just this thing that we haven't really talked about, but I love the way King kind of peppers it through the novel, is Jake sometimes just uses words and phrases that people in 1958, 1959, 1960, 1961 would not be using. And so, like, he just kind of comes off as a little off in a lot of ways. And so, like people that pay attention to these type of things, like Mimi, pick up on this. Other people don't, because other people aren't quite as sharp as her. But I do like this as, like, laying the groundwork of, like, well, not everyone is unobservant, and so there are going to be some people that observe how you are kind of weird, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I love this because I'll bet he just gives off this vibe of otherness and aloofness that's got to be confusing and sometimes off-putting. Yeah. I mean, just setting aside the fact that his accent and his speech patterns and everything are different. Like, I'm sure he just carries himself differently due to the fact that he has all this foreknowledge. Which really amounts to having a kind of superpower, right? So, and at least for the first parts of the book, he sort of felt like this was not real. This was like a game he was playing, and that's got to seep out of the pores. Like, other people detect that you're not quite here. You don't seem to be playing the same game we all are. Or even just funny, like, little moments when he goes into a bar and he, like, talks to the locals in their local patois. It's like, okay, but they can kind of feel that you're doing this ironically.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I mean, there's a scene with Sadie late in this chapter where we kind of just see they're chatting about different things, about politics, about things, and he's approaching this all from a place of knowledge of how things are going to go. It's like, oh, I hate, like, having to go outside to smoke, and it's like, oh, well, schools are going to be no smoking zones one day. It's like it probably comes off as this weirdness, but also this supreme sense of confidence. Like, he can approach a lot of situations with maybe a higher level of confidence than he would back in 2011, because he just, like, everything he says he has some knowledge of. And so I wonder if, like, confidence is a very attractive quality in people, right? And it's like, why the one thing we don't know, like, we're going to get into Sadie here in a second, but we're basically told from the jump that they're going to fall in love. We know he's into her. We don't really know why she likes him very much yet, but that level of confidence of approaching situations with, like, all schools are going to be integrated one day, like, and just saying that with absolute certainty because he has it, I think is interesting for sure.
Yeah, I agree.
So that's the last thing that Miss Mimi talks about here, Matt, is her replacement, Sadie Clayton Dunhill, who is quite important to our story. We're told before we even meet her that Jake will be falling madly in love with her, and we don't know how that's gonna go.
Probably tragically.
We fast forward to the day of the wedding as Jake enjoys himself despite the sweltering heat of Texas in July. I just, like, once again, if you live further north than Texas, or if you've never been to Texas during the summer, it sucks. It especially Dallas, where it's hot and it's also humid as fuck. It's so humid in Dallas during the summer. It's like there were people that lived in this place before there was air conditioning, and I just legitimately don't know how they did it.
Yeah. I basically agree. Although the funny thing is, like, if you go camping for a few days in the summer, you get used to it. But, like, the way in which you get used to it is, like, you just get used to, like, stinking and being sticky all the time, and it stops bothering you. But, like, that's not great though. Like, you just do stink, and you're covered in sweat and grime all the time.
Yeah, no, you're right. But man, I just remember being a kid and, like, doing sports in the summer and just being like, this fucking sucks. Like, you have to be like mainlining water if you're not gonna get heat exhaustion.
Right. I mean, I did get heat exhaustion a few times. I think at least once that I can remember.
Yeah, the fun experience of you know, doing heavy physical activity outside in the middle of the summer in Texas, and then suddenly you're like, wait a minute, I'm cold. Uh-oh.
Yeah.
I know what that means.
Yeah, that was a bad day. I vividly remember that day. Yeah.
So Matt, we meet Sadie Dunhill, an extremely tall blonde woman. She's maybe 6'1", possibly, really tall. And it's like a classic meet cute, right? That involves Jake inadvertently touching her breast, you know, as you do.
Yeah, as you do in a classic meet cute. Yeah, I mean it is a very classic meet cute, like right down the fairway. I was like, come on, Ka, you're not being subtle at all. This is child's play.
I love that Jake even acknowledges that it's a classic meet cute, but in his stupid Jake way, he's like, but it wasn't, because this is real life. So we're just going to be friends.
Right. Despite the fact that I continued to hornily think about her over the next few days. Didn't mean anything. Yeah.
But I go home and climb into bed and think about her. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, just friends, just best buds.
Yeah. Besties. Yeah.
I want to talk to you about this, though. The way Sadie is described, Sadie wasn't clumsy. She was accident prone. It was amusing until you realized what it really was, a kind of haunting. She was the girl, she told me later, who got the hem of her dress caught in a car door when she and her date arrived at the senior prom, and managed to tear her skirt right off as they headed into the gym. She was the woman around whom water fountains malfunctioned, giving her a faceful. The woman who was apt to set an entire book of matches on fire when she lit a cigarette, burning her fingers or singeing her hair. The woman whose bra strap broke during parents' night, or who discovered huge runs in her stockings before school assemblies at which she was scheduled to speak. That kind of feels like the obdurate past, doesn't it? A little bit.
Yeah.
Not clumsy, but accident. But things, it's not you are inattentively causing bad things to you. It's that things just keep happening to you.
Yeah. And being described as a haunting, it's an explicitly supernatural comparison. So something is supernaturally making her life shitty.
Which is great, because I think it does fall in line with your kind of proposal here that Jodie is meant as kind of a mind trap for Jake.
Yeah.
And here we're giving you, it's just this incredibly tall blonde woman. This is a tall blonde who's super tall and beautiful, but not, you're not too tall, because you're taller. Don't worry.
Yeah.
So it's a perfect woman for you. We molded her in a lab for you, and set events in a way that leads to her coming here to Jodie, Texas.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. Yeah.
So we fast forward to the end of August as Jake is working on his book and gets the notification about Mimi's death. I know I said it already, but I'm going to say it again. It is remarkable to me how fast this woman exits the book, and yet how much of an impact she left on me. Like, this is just, in my mind, a classic King characterization here, where like she's in 5 pages total in this book, essentially. And like, I just feel like I know her, and she's great. She's perfect. I love her.
Yeah, I love it. Love it so much. I agree.
Mm-hmm. So Jake volunteers to help organize the assembly at the school to honor Miss Mimi. And it is suggested that he have Sadie help him out so she can win over her new school with banked goodwill, they call it. And of course, it's a great excuse for Jake and Sadie to hang out together.
Yeah.
Jake states outright here, Matt, that the time working together here did not immediately make Jake and Sadie lovers. They did not kiss. They did not hug. They did not do any physical thing at all, but they did become friends. And I think it is interesting how King is slow playing this thing, right? Like, he's basically from the beginning telegraphed these two people are going to fall in love. But then he's waiting a while. Like, you could have just made them have instant attraction to each other, right? Like, you could have made it like that you do the meet cute, and then it was a real meet cute, and then they're dating the next week or sneaking around or something. But he doesn't do that. And I'm curious what you think, like, what the reason for kind of slow playing this would be.
I don't know, just to make it feel more earned, I guess.
Sure.
If you just kind of say, an attractive woman showed up and now they're in love, doesn't quite feel right. And also just like, I think, Jake is not dumb. Like, he knows that it would be a horrible idea to fall in love in the past. It would screw up his whole mission. Like, if he actually fell in love, it would destroy his whole mission. And then he'd be like stuck in the past being in love with whoever this person is. It would and he could never go home is what I mean. Like, he could never go back through the door, because then it would erase that whole relationship. It would erase all, that person from time. So that's the thing we haven't talked much about, but like, he set aside falling in love, like any human relationship he forms at all is going to be eradicated as soon as he steps through that door.
Very true. So can he save JFK and then not have to leave, right? But in that mind, like, would you know if what you did fixed anything?
Yeah, I mean, you just have to wait. You just have to literally just wait and watch, and then what are you gonna do anything differently? Like, are you really gonna? It's a trap. It's a trap.
Yep, it is. So finally, Jake invites Sadie to the football game that Friday night. Football, Matt. I think we can't undersell this enough. How important high school football is to these small Texas towns. I think the good thing about TV is it's demonstrated this to people that don't live in Texas a little bit. Like, there was the show Friday Night Lights, based off the movie Friday Night Lights. There's also Varsity Blues. That movie came out back in the night. I think people around the world have a much better picture into how big of a deal high school football is in small town Texas, like back then and still today. Like, Matt, the most expensive high school football stadium is in Texas. You know how much money it cost?
Some number where, even if I were to guess a really, really high number, it's not going to be enough.
$80 million.
That was so much more than what I was going to say. That's such a ridiculous number. It makes no sense at all.
This is like, it's high school football is a big deal in this state. It is a huge deal, especially in these small towns where this is what they've got. They've got the high school football team.
No air conditioning, not much on TV. Football is life. Makes sense.
Yeah. And it's the old thing for that Varsity Blues and Friday Night Lights and all these shows. Like, this is how you escape town, right? For these kids, this is one of the ways to escape town. I like football a lot. I like high school football is very fun. I don't live in a small town, so I don't really like. No one I know goes to high school football games. And I suspect that will remain true until I have children in high school. I want to say, for the record, that spending $80 million on a high school football stadium is absurd and stupid. And I think that, like, that's fucking crazy.
Yeah. I mean, do they make money selling tickets, or is that just a cost?
Yeah, they do. The football stadium seats 11,000 people.
Oh my God. Jesus.
Yeah. The funny thing is, in Allen, which is a town in North Dallas, far North Dallas, they built a $60 million football stadium. And then they realized, not long after it opened, that they fucked up and there were severe architectural problems with the stadium. And so they had to tear it down and build it all over again.
That's remarkable.
Yeah, your tax dollars at work, folks.
Did you know that the stadium in Berkeley, the university in Berkeley, the name of which is escaping me, which is ridiculous because it's UC Berkeley. The stadium is built directly on the fault line, and so they actually had to, like, basically structurally cut the stadium in half so that when the fault line shifts, it doesn't just tear the stadium in half. The two halves of the stadium basically are separate from each other.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, that's an absolute tangent, but I just thought that was funny and weird that they did that.
Couldn't they just put the stadium somewhere else?
I don't think they knew the fault line was there.
So this is after they built it, they were like, "Oops."
I think so. This is one of those things where somebody told me this, and then I never checked that it was true. So if I'm wrong, it's someone else's fault, not my fault.
This is literally how old wives' tales get started.
You come to this podcast for truthiness.
Yeah. Someone says they heard something from someone, they repeat it to someone else, and then fucking 80 years later, I'm at my pediatrician saying, yeah, my daughter's got a fever, but I just figured it was because she was teething. Yeah. And my pediatrician looks at me like I'm a fucking idiot and says, teething doesn't cause fevers.
Uh-huh. It's just like in the 1960s when you couldn't just Wikipedia something. You were like, yeah, that's what I heard. So that's it.
So the two of them go to the football game together, and although it's not strictly romantic, they do arrive together, and everyone in town is there, and they see them together, and it turns their heads. They notice them. So here we go. Yeah. But Matt, the past isn't done fucking with our Jake here, because he's happy here. He's happy in the past, but he doesn't belong here, Matt. And suddenly the past reminds him of this as the crowd chants for the star quarterback Jim Ledoux. We're reminded of the yellow card man, and the first time Jake met him, he said, "Get out of here, go the fuck away, Jimla." And Jake was like, "That, I don't know what that means." In fact, I think I asked you at the time, Matt, what's that mean? And you said, I don't know.
I had no idea. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, here we go. It says, the past harmonizes with itself. That much I already understood. But what song was this? I didn't know, and it worried me plenty. In the concrete runway leading to the refreshment stand, the chant was magnified, making me want to put my hands over my ears and block it out. Jimla, Jimla, Jimla. Oh boy, that's not good.
Yeah. So, I mean, we don't really know why, though. Like, is the past telling him that he doesn't belong here, or reminding him that he doesn't belong here, just kind of warning him off? It's not really clear.
Don't know. Do not know. But it is certainly ominous.
Yep.
Yep. We just can't let this guy be happy.
Yep.
Jimla.
Jimla.
Presumably, they eventually say Jim Ledoux, right? They say Jimla, Jim. Like, do they ever say the last part of his name? It really bothers me.
They explained the way this chant worked, and I was like, huh? And then and then I just went on with my day. But I think it was like, something like they're rearranging things, and then they were gonna. I literally don't remember now, honestly.
I think it's like a call and response, right? Like some people are saying Jim, and some people are saying La, and I just always thought they'd be like Jim, La, do, but it doesn't seem like that happens.
Yeah, right. It seems. I mean, maybe it's just like he is fixated on the part where they're saying Jimla, 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 even though maybe they are saying the other part too.
Yeah, it could be, or they're just shortening it because they're just having fun with it.
Yeah,
just Jimla, Jimla. Yeah. All right, but that is the end of chapter 13 and the end of our reading for the week. Matt, I think it's also the end of our part 3, by the way. We're moving on to part 4 of the novel, titled Sadie and the General.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So there you
go.
General.
We know the General.
We do know the General. I don't recall the General's name at this current moment, but I bet you I will know next week.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, let's get on to the discussion question. What was our question last week, Matt?
What's your favorite bet, sports or otherwise, in fiction or in real life?
I thought this was a fun question.
Yeah. Brambino 1996 says, Edgar Allan Poe has a story called Never Bet the Devil Your Head. This story has a character called Toby Dammit. He can be regarded as a little shit. He is constantly going around saying he will bet the devil his head. You think I can't steal that, but the devil my head I can, that kind of thing. One day they come to a covered bridge with no windows. The kids come to a turnstile, and Toby says to his friends he can jump it, putting his head online once more to the Prince of Darkness. In the gloom, there is a little old man who takes him up on the bet. As Toby jumps, he falls with a thump, and the old man scurries off with something in his hands. When his friends get close, they see, surprise, surprise, his head is gone. Then his friends proceed to sell his body to be made into dog food.
What?
Just a good rule of thumb to never bet the devil your head.
Yeah, but okay, that part I get, but
He couldn't jump the
Matt, if you
turnstile.
ever lose your head, I'm going to sell your body to make dog food.
It was a different time. And the turnstiles were sharper.
I've read so much Edgar Allan Poe. I would think I've read all of Edgar Allan Poe, but then I hear a story like this, and I'm like, I have definitely not read this one.
Me neither.
Squatch42 says, my favorite bet was the slap bet in How I Met Your Mother. Sure, it's an uncultured answer, but I love a good running gag. Marshall wins a bet against Barney so he can slap Barney at any 5 random times, which was later extended to 8 by the slap bet commissioner due to various violations of the slap bet code and the writer's desire to keep the gag running. The silliness is in the seriousness with which they approach it, the almost solemn adherence to the code of the slap bet, the constant possibility of a massive slap happening at any moment, the serious eye contact between the two when the slap is about to be rendered. Say what you will about the show, the slap bet was one of the more endearing and enduring parts of it. Honorable mention to the episode of DuckTales where Scrooge and Glomgold made a bet in which each of them would attempt to earn the most money. Slap bet is a great answer. I love How I Met Your Mother. I know the ending is divisive, and I agree with the majority of the complaints about it. But I really like that show. And the slap bet was, the show did a lot of fun with like recurring gags, and they would do things where they would like do one-off references to something, and they wouldn't pay off those references until like seasons later in ways that were always kind of fun and satisfying, but not like mysterious or like mystery boxy, but just like, this is a fun joke and I'll tell you about that story later, and it would come back in a fun way later. And the slap bet was very funny. Yeah, I think Squatch said it right, where like it's kind of silly because it's just slapping a guy on the face. Like, yeah, it hurts, but like it's not actually that dramatic. But the fact that everyone treats it as incredibly dramatic and serious, and it's just really it's fun. Yeah. It's really fun.
Sounds great. I haven't seen it, but that sounds funny. All right. Mark Davo says, favorite bet/gamble in fiction is the one in Guards by Terry Pratchett. In the book, there's a dragon who's taken the throne, and our heroes reason that if the chances of hitting it with an arrow are 1 in a million, then it's bound to work. So they carefully arrange the shot so it's no more or less than a 1 in a million chance, or so they think. What if it's just 1,000 to 1 chance? Said Colin agonizedly. What? Anyone ever hear of 1,000 to 1 shot coming up? Carrot looked up. Don't be daft, Sergeant, he said. No one ever saw 1,000 to 1 chance come up. The odds against it are, his lips moved, millions to 1. I like the way Pratchett satirizes the fact storytellers often create convoluted ways their characters have to beat the odds, because as storytellers, they get to stack the dice. The million to 1 shot always works in stories. Everyone knows that.
That's great. I haven't read Guards. I really mean to, because I've enjoyed every time we've read Pratchett for the book club, but
yeah,
haven't done it yet.
Me too. Yeah.
Kashaku says, as for my favorite bet made in fiction, I'd have to go with the final game of poker in Rounders with Matt Damon and John Malkovich. Matt Damon has already bet Teddy KGB once, but gets goaded into another game with his winnings, putting the $20,000 he's already won, which would pay off a friend's debt to some bad people, back on the line because of his ego. If you haven't seen Rounders, I highly recommend it. It's a well-written film with a great cast, and it's quite a bit of fun. I love Rounders. Rounders is like, I don't know. If you're a certain generation, you were required to watch Rounders.
I guess you and I are of different generations.
That's very upsetting to me.
I know. This seems like I would have watched it, but no.
Yeah.
Baby Can You Dig Your Sam says, who doesn't love the bet at the center of the Seinfeld episode, The Contest? The 4 friends make a bet to see who can go the longest without masturbating. Who will be the master of their own domain? Master of their domain. Kramer goes down almost immediately, storms into Jerry's apartment, slams down his $100 and yells, I'm out. Elaine drops out after sharing a taxi with JFK Jr., appropriate to our reading. Jerry is dating a virgin at the time who is appalled by the contest and breaks up with him, only to lose her virginity to JFK Jr. And George is eventually the winner.
I love this episode of Seinfeld. One of my favorites, for sure.
I agree.
Once again, it functions because it takes the kind of absurd conceit ridiculously seriously. And the people are like physically struggling with having to resist their urge to masturbate. Like, it's just very funny.
It's great. I love this. I agree. It's one of my favorite episodes. Yeah.
Obi-Wan Martinez says, in the Sandman comic series Dream of the Endless, our protagonist is emerging from 7 decades of captivity in the basement of an ersatz Aleister Crowley called Roderick Burgess. During that time, he's lost his 3 artifacts of office, his helm, his ruby, and a pouch of sand. After retrieving the pouch from a former girlfriend of John Constantine, Dream travels to Hell seeking his helm. He's guided by the demon Etrigan to Lucifer Morningstar. Dream explains one of his demons in Hell has his helm and is returned to him following a challenge to a battle of wits, which Dream wins. Lucifer is angered by his loss in the contest and swears vengeance on Dream. Once again, we haven't read The Sandman, so I don't fully understand that, but I think there's a very common theme of bets with the devil that happen, right?
Yeah, for sure. I just went on a tangent where I was like, Etrigan is Etrigan a common demon name? Because then that would make Intragian make a bunch more sense.
It might be. Yeah, I don't know.
But I can't actually find any references to Etrigan beyond
just Sandman.
Sandman. So
well, Sandman came out. Yeah, Intrigan the demon was first depicted in February 1989. So
okay,
maybe this is where King got it from. Yeah,
maybe
we've solved the puzzle.
We found another piece of the puzzle at least. All right, Vonnegut's Ghost says life stinks is probably lesser Mel Brooks, but it's not without its charms. Leslie Ann Warden and Jeffrey Tambor are pretty great alongside Brooks, and Tambor gets the line of the movie. Tambor and Brooks are real estate developers who make a bet that Brooks can't live on the streets for a month. Drunk on his own bootstrapperism, Brooks takes the bet. Hilarity ensues. It's almost too raw to be funny, but that's something that Brooks never shied away from. Not his best, but underappreciated. And then they give the line, "Excuse me, I'm sorry, am I interrupting? I'm interrupting, aren't I? Yeah, I should go because this is wrong. It's stupid. It's wrong. It's morally and ethically wrong for me to even be in here, right? Isn't it? Because we all know that your client only has 2 days to go to win the bet. It looks like he's going to win it. Therefore, I have no business even being here, do I?" Both lawyers have silent, stunned looks on their faces. I'm just going to put it simply, gentlemen. Would you consider betraying the man for whom you've worked for 10 years in exchange for, how do you say this, just a shitload of money? I'm sure the actor did a better line reading than I just did.
Oh, almost certainly.
But
I love Mel Brooks.
Sounds fun.
Yeah, I've actually never seen this movie though.
I feel like there's a weird percentage of like, I haven't seen that this week. Normally I don't completely strike out. Normally it's like,
have you seen that Mel Brooks movie? No.
Nope.
Yeah. He's done a lot of movies, man. Can't see them all.
Yeah.
I guess
I have seen this next one though. I've seen Pulp Fiction. So,
this one's actually mine. I think we just messed up the ordering. Steve Living Room says his favorite bet is Bruce Willis betting on himself in Pulp Fiction, screwing over his boss in the process, leading to all the shit going down. Is a great one. Very true. It's the old betting with the mob thing, and it actually works out for him, but only because of a very unfortunate visit to a pawn shop. Is that where they were when they get captured?
Pawn shop.
I think so. Yeah.
Pawn shop. Don't bet against the mob or the devil. Sorry.
Yeah. Sorry. Steve also says No Country for Old Men is the worst when he makes the cashier call heads or tails and his life is on the line. It said specifically, but you can feel the tension and know the cashier knows it. Yeah, I love that. All those scenes, very good.
Yeah.
They also mention Eddie Murphy and Dan Aykroyd in Trading Places, betting $1 that they could ruin the old guy Randolph and Mortimer Duke and get filthy rich themselves in the same process was perfect. Classic.
That's just a great movie. Love it.
I love that movie.
Pear Jane says, the bet I can't get out of my head is the 3rd season Double or Nothing episode of Angel. It's more or less a standalone, so no big spoilers here. We learned that our hero Gunn sold his soul to a demon 10 years earlier, and the demon has come to collect. Ultimately, the whole episode hinges on a high card, low card split of the deck. If Angel loses, he will offer his soul in addition to Gunn's. If he wins, they all keep their souls. He picks his card. He loses. Cordelia stabs the demon in the hand so he can't get up from the table. Angel shouts, anybody else here owed this guy? And our heroes flee the scene while everyone in the room tears the demon boss limb from limb. in the words of the asshole rich dad's, in the words of the asshole rich kid's dad in the movie One Crazy Summer, the only way to win is to cheat.
It's true. And it helps that if you're like a immortal vampire, just helps.
That's true. I mean, I imagine that'll help with a lot of things.
I mean, not sunbathing.
That's true. That's true.
Big Willie Double XL says, Snatch is one of my favorite movies. Mickey is probably Brad Pitt's best character, and he has had some amazing roles. The movie revolves around unlicensed boxing and gambling, but my favorite bet isn't from a fight. Turkish, Jason Statham, makes a coursing wager with Mickey. Coursing is when you set two dogs loose on a hare. The hare has to outrun the dogs. If he doesn't, well, the big rabbit gets fucked, doesn't it? Proper fucked. It's a great scene. It cuts back and forth between the dogs chasing the hare and Tyrone getting caught and interrogated with the aid of the dogs. Guy Ritchie's early stuff is really a league of its own. Another crazy bet is Adam Sandler's parlay in Uncut Gems. He bets it all on a crazy parlay wager for Game 7 of the 2012 NBA Eastern Conference Finals between the Celtics and 76ers. For those who don't know what a parlay is, it's a bet that has multiple parts that have to be met in order to win the bet. Jake essentially bet a two-leg parlay saying that A, the Braves would go up 3-1, and B, the Yankees would win the series. My favorite thing about the parlay in Uncut Gems is that one of the 7 legs of the bet was that Boston won the opening tip jump ball. He bet everything on what is literally a toss-up. The scene leading right at the start of the game is pretty intense, and it's amplified when you realize the weight of that opening tip. If you haven't seen the movie yet, you need to. It's a really good flick, and it's fun when you get to see the primarily comedic actors in. Two great answers. I haven't seen Snatch in forever, but really love that movie.
Yeah, people have been telling me to see Uncut Gems for a long time. This is one where I have a better excuse than just laziness. It's literally just like, that sounds really stressful.
It is one of the most stressful viewing experiences of my life. It is just wall to wall. Oh my fucking God, dude. What are you doing? Why are you doing this? Like every moment in this movie when you think he's like had a lucky break and has like dug his way out of the problem he's in, he just like does it again. Uh-huh. It's like, oh, like to give a slight, not spoiler, but like setup of the movie. He works in a pawn shop, and Kevin Garnett, who was a player for the Boston Celtics at the time, like has gotten his hand on a uncut gem that he wants to be cut into a ring, and he basically asks Sandler to hold on to it for him. And Sandler like immediately takes it and pawns it for some money that he's going to place on other bets. And it's just like a string of that shit where like everything's on the clock. It's just, dude, it's it's such an intense movie. Uh-huh. It's like, it's exhausting. You definitely have to like clear your day out and just be ready to be completely overwhelmed.
Excellent. I'll get around to it, I guess.
Great answers, everyone. I really liked all those. When I asked the question, the Seinfeld bet was the one that I immediately thought of, just because it's just it's so funny.
Yeah, it's a classic.
Yeah. All right. So next week, I think this is going to be a fun question too. We talked this week about several novels that were like big, arguably great American novels, and with The Catcher of the Rye, with Of Mice and Men. And I thought it'd be fun to ask y'all at home, what is the great American novel? You can only pick one. Yeah. That's the rule we're gonna set right here. We usually don't put rules on this thing, Matt, but I'm gonna put a rule on this thing because I don't want people listing like 15 novels or something.
Right. Gotta pick one, and it's got to be the correct one.
Yeah, there is a right answer here, folks. I actually think this is really cool, and like if you're an international listener going like, well, I don't know, I don't live there. I think actually I'm almost more interested in hearing what you pick, because as we've talked about before, the international perspective on what America is really interesting to me. So I think it's gonna be fun. Yeah, pick a book and let us know why.
Yeah, I'm excited to see the answers.
Mm-hmm. All right, that is it for us this week. Next week, 11/22/63 continues as we begin part 4 of the novel with chapters 14 through 16. Matt, I'm so excited. I am loving reading this book with you, and I can't wait for more.
Me too. In the meantime, remember you can reach us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com, over on Twitter at kingslingerspod, and of course over on the subreddit at reddit.com/r/doofmedia.
There's a lot of people on Twitter that are like really like psychopathic about when people call it Twitter. Isn't that weird?
It is, and I don't give a shit. I say it both ways sometimes, just whatever mood I'm in.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just so used to saying Twitter. Yeah. Like, I think King tweeted something today that was like, "If you're not disgruntled, are you gruntled?" And then a few minutes later, he said, "Twitter says yes." And he did the thing where King doesn't understand how like threads in Twitter work, so he just makes a tweet that's a follow up to a previous tweet, like its own thing. He uses Twitter all the time, but still doesn't understand this, and it's very funny. So the tweet is just like an independent tweet that just says Twitter says yes, and Elon Musk says X says no, and then there's like 100 people responding to this being like, "It's X, not Twitter, idiot." It's like, why do you care? Who cares?
There's a lot of
people are weird.
This whole thing in this world.
Weird.
Yeah, it is weird.
Anyway, if you want to not hear about Twitter anymore and instead want a cool mug, you can head on over to doofmedia.myshopify.com. Man, the if you podcast me, then podcast me mug is flying off the shelves.
It is. It like, actually is.
It's far and above the most popular item we have on that shop, which both does and doesn't surprise me. It does in that it's a great looking mug and I love it. Or doesn't rather. Does in that it's an extremely obscure, unfunny inside joke.
No one will ever, even if you explain it, no one will ever think it's funny. That's my favorite kind of obscure inside joke, though.
True. So yeah. If you haven't jumped on the mug train, you got to get on board. We're all doing it. All of us. Be like us.
Yep, that's right. And aside from that, if you enjoy Kingslingers and you want to support us, then please consider donating over on Patreon at patreon.com/doofmedia. We got some bonus content coming up for the Castle Rock TV show next week. This week, me and my brother put out one of our bonus shows that we put over on there on the Patreon feed. So if you're interested in any of that, then consider checking out the Patreon.
Yeah, the Freeman Bros took a little bit of a hiatus as both of your lives got pretty busy, but it's back, and a really good episode. I listened to that today and really enjoyed it. So if you've never checked out Freeman Bros, it's just my co-host here and his brother talking about mostly AI, but also whatever else they're thinking about in the world.
Yeah, that's a fair pitch.
But of course, if you cannot afford to join the community, that is absolutely okay. You can always help us out by sharing the podcast. You're a member of the community just by listening, technically. So you can share the podcast. You can let people know what you think of it. And of course, you can let us know by leaving a rating and a review. We don't have any new reviews to read this week. So we're going to finally burn every single copy of Cujo. So apologies, Stephen King. This is what happens when people don't leave us rating and reviews. There are consequences, and Cujo now no longer exists. It's a pretty good book. Yeah. So we're going to move on to Pet Sematary because we're going to keep it animal themed for now. So
that's good.
That's the one on the chopping block for next week. So you better get those reviews in.
Oh, that's fun.
It's always good to burn books, right? That's never been a bad thing.
No, it's fine. It's fine. They'll understand.
Yeah. Thank you to all of you who have sent those reviews, and we really do appreciate it. Eventually, we're just going to hit a threshold of when every single listener has left a review, and then the entire Stephen King catalog is going to be sacrificed in anger.
Yeah. Right.
But that just means you need to get more people to listen to the show. You out there, that's your fault. That's not our fault.
Yeah. It's one of those schemes where like there's few people at the top and there's like more at the bottom. Forget the name.
No, I don't think that's a thing. All right, folks. We'll see you back here next week for another episode, for 3 more chapters, for more in 1961. Maybe we'll even move into 62. I don't know. We'll see if we have time. I don't know. We'll see you then. Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.